record button that pops up and says recording. Recording starts. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of WrestleCast, where I am joined by Danny Martinez, Mr. It Was Me all along, Austin, and I am poor Shane because I just wanted to give that man a hug. And we are obviously going to talk about the six-part episode. Well, yeah, the whole season of the documentary Mr. McMahon, which is just dropped on Netflix this past Friday. And six parts, as I said before, that is supposed to be an extensive reveal into Mr. Vince McMahon's life, his family, his children, his co-workers, fellow wrestlers, people that know him, and there is a lot of things that there is to discuss because this was six episodes and it was exciting and sad and an emotional roller coaster. So right off the bat, what I want to know with you, Mr. Martinez, what were your initial thoughts both before this aired? We heard the news that this was going to be a documentary. This is Netflix. We do know Netflix direct connection to the WWE. And then when you saw the documentary itself, what was you thinking before, during, and after?
Well, I'm sure we'll touch on it later, but I'll mention real quick, just before I saw the series, I had heard that Vince McMahon was trying to buy the rights of it. So he was trying to pull it back out. And I was just like, oh, there's something juicy here. Like I'm waiting for something to really drop. So I was really excited for like a big reveal or a big something that just we didn't know. So I was excited from the beginning as a wrestling fan. Like I know the shit that goes down throughout the industry and stuff for the past like 20, 25 years, maybe a little bit more. Hey, we know a lot of the dirt that's happened. So I'm waiting for that stuff to come around, and I'm watching the series, and I'm enjoying myself. I still am enjoying myself. It was done very well, and as I'm enjoying myself, towards the tail end of the series, I actually became a bit disappointed, and that's mostly because, as a fan, as someone has been watching wrestling for God knows how long, and has read dirt sheets, has read rumors, has read a lot of stuff that's gone down over the years. Everything that has happened in the series, I have already known. So nothing is revealed that I felt like was like a bombshell for me. It's not something that you can't find out in public already. So I was kind of disappointed towards the end, but still a very well done documentary.
And muted. Now, remember, this was a documentary that was done for many years. We have learned about this before. We heard about this documentary. We knew that Vince was going to participate. So my initial thoughts was, oh, it's a fluff piece. Because he's not going to get down with the nitty and the gritty, with him actually explaining everything and them confronting him about it. And then when we heard that the allegations popped off, and it was like, oh, yeah, they're probably not going to do the documentary because we didn't hear about the documentary for a while. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So then they just dropped it. And then Netflix was like, no, hi, we're still here. We have information and interviews. And I'm like, okay, sure, we'll see. And then, once Vince, as you stated before, released that statement, I was like, oh. In a way, his response, because remember, he made two responses. He made a response of, he was trying to buy the documentary, so I'm like, oh, something salacious is happening. What's going on? Maybe now he regrets what he did say. Maybe it was a lot he said. Maybe they researched others. And then there was a whole thing with Janelle Grant. Janelle Grant wasn't asked to be a part of the documentary, and we thought that she would be. But through her attorney, she released a statement. It was like, nah, they didn't even approach us. And I was like, oh. And then I was like, could she even speak if they did approach her? Because this is an ongoing, this is not some cute little, I'm taking you to Judge Judy. This is like a federal investigation with RICO, probably. I don't know. We don't know the full length of everything. So when I was watching it, I had the same thing as you. As you stated before, we've grown up with this. So everything that we could know, we have seen through extensive documentaries, through a ton of different series. There was the entire, remember, WWE released a DVD. Back in the day, children, they used to be DVDs. But they released a DVD of Mr. McMahon. And remember, it was a split face event, as Vince McMahon, and then the Mr. McMahon wrestling character in like his tank top, and the other part was him in a suit. So even WWE itself is like, look at this guy. He owns the company. Yet he's a wrestling in the company. And there's storylines, but he's the puppet master. So we knew about this before. But then I thought of this. Netflix has to appease both casual, I don't know what wrestling is, and the fans, the diehards, the day ones. These are people coming in who's like, well, say you never watched wrestling before, but Vince McMahon and these allegations, I'm gonna go watch this documentary. You know, I only know wrestling through WrestleMania and The Rock and Austin. There are names that have crossed over, but you don't really have to watch wrestling to be like, I am part where I remember when Dwayne Johnson came back the last time, there were kids literally like saying, why is this actor trying to be a wrestler? And I was like, oh God, we're really that old now. We're a whole generation doesn't know him as a wrestler.
Oh,
They're like,
man.
why is Moana fighting? And I'm like, oh no, I'm old. But they had that task. And as you stated, because we are someone who knows the extent of everything, I was very disappointed. And as someone who read, there is a fantastic book out there called Ringmaster that is a deep dive into the life of Vince McMahon, which I read. I got the audio book. I was like taking notes. I was like, oh snap. And there's a lot of things that they left out from that book. So I'm like, oh well, boo. But to me, I thought it was okay. I felt that it was all over the place at certain parts. It didn't dive deep in enough when it should have. Vince was revealing things that, as a journalist, you'd have been like, hold on, what? What did you say? Let's rewind. You're admitting to what? You didn't say, but and they didn't do that. And that really broke my heart because there were so many missed opportunities. So that was kind of like my initial thoughts right away. But we will dive into this. This was 6 parts, as we stated. And this opened up, and I think that it was such a really strong opening of anyone who has read novels, psychology, anything just like basic white girl thriller novels. We have the unreliable narrator, where we don't know whether or not we can trust what this person is saying. Is it truths? Is it lies? Is it fantasies? And that, in a nutshell, was its opening. When he said, so he said, for a period of time, people wondered who I really am. The portrayal of me is I'm a bad guy, but no one really knows me. And it's been a while for me to try to figure out myself. I still haven't quite figured out who I am. Then he says, I can't even read my own writing. Then Shane goes, my dad gets the rap that he wants. And he says, Vince says, I don't want anybody to really know me. So then right here, that is the entire, sums up the entire docuseries for me, is I'm going to give you what I want you to know about me, but what's really there, I'm going to keep close to the vest. And because of that, other wrestlers, and we'll dive into it because again, so many missed opportunities, give that as well, because remember that puppet master thing, if you look at how this whole thing is, he's controlling everybody. So I'm going to give you a version of me that you think you know, and different people may have a different version of me, but none of it is the truth. And when you sit down to do this documentary, it's purposely all over the place because I've shown you what I want you to see, and I want you to reiterate what it is that you think you know about me. That's just kind of how I got it. I could be wrong. What are your thoughts, Mr. Martinez?
I think that was probably the worst way you could start a documentary, because that was on the first episode. Just the way that he said all that, because you're in there, you want to get the dirt, you want to get like the gossip, you want to get all the dark stuff, and the first thing you hear from Vince McMahon is, I don't really want you to know me. And then one I don't know it verbatim, but one phrase that really got to me right in the beginning was, "Oh, I got some stories to tell you, but I'm not going to tell you because it's not good. They're not good. I don't want you to know any of that stuff. I'll tell you some other ones, but not these. These are no good." I was just like, "Are you kidding me? Like, what are you talking about right now? Like, you're trying to save your perception of the public right now, and this is what you want to say." Like, so it was not a good start. I was just like, "Oh, this is going to be a very cautious documentary," and it's I think it's going to try to play both sides and try to be as fair as possible, because Netflix is going to be working with WWE, so they don't want to burn any bridges before like they even get started. So it makes sense.
Right. And to go on that, this was filmed, at least that part was filmed before the allegations. Remember, at the very end, he was supposed to do more interviews, but he was like, nah, and he dipped out because that's when it's like, oh, Janelle Grant said that you pooped on her head. And you're like, oh, and it got much more serious than like, hey, I may have just copped the feel every now and then. This was like extensive. We've read the reports. I've definitely read that whole testimony situationship, and it was like, bless Jesus. But with that being said, though, when you brought up that moment of him telling that story of, no, I can't do it, that to me psychologically was to show I'm in control of this. You may be filming me, but I'm in control. And look, I'm going to dangle these little parts here, and you're going to be salivating for more. And then that is the ultimate Mr. McMahon. And even he stated, I cannot tell you the difference between us. It's that same, they're the same person now. And that is, in essence, kind of what this documentary is. When does Vince McMahon end and Mr. McMahon begin? And it seems like we don't know, and we don't have an answer for that. And that is exactly what he wants us to know. Because those stories that he didn't tell us, that's the real thing. But this little dangling of the carrot part of like, here's a little bit, here's some teasers, but that's not who I really am. So I was frustrated you, but it fascinated me with that part. So then kind of just dive in. We have the sixth part was broken down into Junior, which followed his father's footsteps. And it kind of, again, told stories that we already knew. He grew up in a trailer park. He was considered the poorest of the poor, and he, always admired, not necessarily admired, but how you, as anybody you want. Hey, it may be something simple as, hey, I want that toy bicycle. And then as you get older, it's more of a wanting of money, a better house, respect. And it really seemed to me that he was a boy who didn't have any respect. And he talked about his father wasn't in his life until the age of 12. And it never really touched upon, where was he this whole time? Where'd he go? And he walked into his life at 12, and he talked about he was with his stepfather. And his stepfather was abusive. And he said, because this was the part where I passed out, I already knew this. Because again, you got to read the book. I was like, he talked about the incest. He didn't say what happened, but he did say my family was comprised of infighting, fighting, and incest. And that, as a journalist, big missed opportunity. But whatever.
Was that something from the book, or that was from the documentary?
No, this is the documentary.
Okay. I probably missed that part. I think I missed that part.
When he was breaking down like, hey, all I know in my family basically is fighting, infighting, because the fighting being wrestling, infighting within ourselves, because he came from an abusive household, and incest. And it alluded to his mom was doing things to him. Could have also been the stepfather. We didn't dive deep into that because no one wants to be an investigative journalist. But that is essentially what happened. And so with part one, it was him basically craving love. And it just showed following in his father's footsteps as to how he got into wrestling. And he talked about his favorite wrestler. So for you, what were your thoughts, if you can remember, of part one?
It definitely brought on a lot of sympathy for me over Vince McMahon growing up. I think, coming from like myself, I can put myself in those shoes as well, of just like having a difficult time having a relationship with a father and wanting that approval or that love or even just acknowledgement, just anything like that. And like, his dad was so focused on the company that that's all that mattered. So what better way to get your father's approval or at least acknowledgement as to like, I could do your job better. I will bring this company to better heights and stuff like that. So let me buy this company off of you and I'm going to show you what I'm made of. So like it definitely gives you a little bit of sympathy and a little bit of understanding of the drive that he had on how he wanted to bring this company up differently and better than what his father did. So it was an interesting episode.
So yeah, again, for me, it was a lot of interesting parts, and it was very interesting in terms of him talking about him just wanting a hug from his father, and his father does not. He's not affectionate, and clearly his mom and his stepfather were not affectionate people either. So you just see this kid kind of craving that love and that attention, and him just basically kind of never getting it. And what was really interesting was that his favorite wrestler was Dr. Jerry Graham, and I really wish that they would have kind of did a dive, not even something huge, into who Dr. Jerry Graham was and kind of the rise and the fall of him. And he was basically the founder of Graham Wrestling, and he came from the army, and he was this big strong man that Vince looked up to, and he saw power within him. And if you look at it back in the day of how Vince wanted his wrestlers to look, it was kind of like Dr. Jerry
Oh
Graham.
yeah.
That big, strong. You remember, Vince does not like small. He does not like kind of puny looking guys. For example, we know with Brian Danielson or Daniel Bryan back in the day, or even other people. He was not there for the underdog. He wanted this exerted manly strength, and I just kind of wish they would dive deeper into that, but they didn't. So we have what we have. So to me, I thought the first episode was really interesting to kind of show the groundwork of this is a guy who literally came from nothing, and then him being introduced into his father's life and how he kept saying all he wanted was a hug, and he never got that. And I guess for me, him trying to get his attention was being there within the business and then kind of creating this world and realizing that it's about fantasy, and you can have anything that you want in this fantasy, and you can make people love you essentially by how the wrestlers are, and that storytelling, and what is it like to be a bad guy and a good guy, and manipulate people's feelings, which in a way are the feelings that he never got.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that kind of stuck out to me, I'm not sure if I'm getting into, I think this is heat, but was not just his relationship with his father, but his relationship with the business, and him always having an eye on wanting to expand and to do more. And his father built a lot of trust with people. The argument was always Vince McMahon Sr. would have hated what Vince McMahon Jr. did to the business,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the territories, in terms of, turning his back on other people, and your word is no longer your bond anymore. It's just, you're using people. And what you say is going to happen just doesn't happen. They alluded to the Montreal screw job. That was just something that we saw on TV. There has been screw jobs from the beginning with Vince. Then that has been recorded and stuff that has not been recorded in terms of him just screwing over people. And so that was interesting there. And then we kind of go into Heat. So remember, Heat was about basically Vince building his reputation in the business. Remember, he started out as a little helper, and then he started doing the announcing, and him working the phones, and him making the deals. And this is when it became, and very interesting because it's very cyclical, which you'll end up seeing later about Vince calling his father antiquated and that he didn't want to expand. And we see a lot of that now. Well, back when he was running up until 22, I believe, 23.
22, yeah.
22. So, what were your thoughts on the second episode, which focused on him being that businessman and wanting to take over the business, and his father being like,
I found it funny, and this is a couple episodes down, but I found it funny that with this episode and the last one, they talk about the territories, and he started to poach all these people from the other territories because there was this unwritten rule that you don't set foot. It's like a circus. Nobody sets foot in other people's territories. And that's exactly what Vince did because he wanted to expand. And later down the road in other episodes, someone actually asked him the question, don't you think you're being a hypocrite for doing this when WCW was doing the same thing, but you're bashing WCW for it? And he's like, no, I did it for the business. They're doing it because of whatever reason, like they hate me or a personal reason. I was like, no, bullshit. It's business. It's business and business. And he doesn't see it that way. Vince is in his own world. But it's the same thing with expanding. So once he expanded and things were getting bigger and more grandiose and stuff, I know eventually, me and you, we watched the Attitude Era and the ruthless aggression era, and then things started to get a bit stale because they started to get a bit more PG. We kind of outgrew it, I guess, and they were more focused on the kids. So the product started to get more stale, but Vince was still set. Now he was the one being antiquated. He was the one kind of being left behind while everybody else was trying to branch out and do more. And I kind of see that cyclical nature of it too.
and then, we'll touch in upon when it comes to next generations, because then it was like, oh, snap, he's really grandpa in this whole situation. Poor little Uncle Grandpa over there. But yeah, so I thought that episode was really interesting to show how he saw the world, but was in the business, but was really interesting. He never took any kind of blame. He never said, I'm sorry. He has no regrets or regrets. It was always, look at what they did to me. Me. And him trying to paint that picture of, I came from nothing, which he did. He came from nothing, and I raised it up as great as it is today. I single-handedly did this, and everyone was out to get me, but I survived the best in all of them. And it was like, oh, that's what you want us to believe. But meanwhile, people did get hurt, lives were lost, jobs suffered, territories destroyed, and it forever changed how we look at wrestling today. You can make the argument for the better or for the good, but it was really, you sacrificed a lot of people's jobs for your business, and to constantly paint yourself as the victim. What was really interesting is how, yes, this was about Vince and his business, but you know how when they do interviews, we never had, hey, I'm Joe Bob, who lived down the street from Vince, and we've been best friends since the age of 2 years old. All of the people that talked about him were people who were in the business. There was never any kind of personal touches, personal friends, other family members who may have not been outside of the business. I know that his brother is dead. His dad is definitely dead, and I think his mom is either dead or way too old to say anything. But just in terms of, we're your friends. You're almost, what? You're 80 something years old. How old is Vince? I don't know how old Vince is. But let me see really quickly. He is 79 years
79.
Old.
Yeah.
So you're going to tell me in your 79 years of life, you don't have a bestie that's not in the business. You don't have the neighbor down the street that makes sure your cat is eating and your plants are watered. I was just kind of waiting for it. Yep.
To be fair though, we're talking about Vince McMahon who lives, breathes, sleeps, he poops the company. Like he like everything. Like That's this man. He's even admitted too. He usually sleeps like no more than like 4 hours a day. Like this guy does.
That's true.
All he does is the company stuff. Like I see him as a person that doesn't have any personal friends. Everyone he knows and possibly loves is in the company, and that's it. Like I don't think he
So
has
then,
ties with anyone else.
so then it seems to me that everything that is transactional, even in terms of
Yeah,
friends,
I
that
would.
it's transactional, and it's what can you serve my business and me, and that's kind of sad. I just wish, and I understand that. It's kind of wish we could have had like a personal touch, but then that goes like you said before. That adds so much other. It adds so many layers that I really wish that they would have explored as well. Because then it's like, no, this man does not have any kind of outside activity. This, and he did allude to saying this is his mistress. This is the one person he will always be loyal to. This is his wife. He loves this more than probably even himself. Is his business. And yeah. So then as I was, what were we on? Episode two. So episode two, he, as I stated, the father was antiquated, and now he was the one who wanted to expand, and his father did not want to expand. So essentially, he bought the business from him. And I kind of really, this is kind of, I wish the dad was alive because I would have loved to have known what did that feel like to give your son, because it wasn't like having son, I give you my business. It kind of felt like I'm gonna just steal it from you, and then that goes back to later on in the episode with Shane. Remember when he's sitting there with not the, but for dramatic effect, I'm gonna say the butcher knife, and it was like, "You have to stab me in the heart. Can you do that for the business?"
Yeah, that okay. So I love that part, and that part actually, like, I was like, I never heard this story before, so I was like, oh, this is a big juicy thing, little tidbit right here. Like, but the thing is that it came from Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman is a master storyteller. Like, for all you know, it was a butter knife, and all he did
A
was like
plastic spoon.
it was like the smallest little passing of an anecdote, but Paul Heyman makes it into this big thing. And I'm not saying it could or couldn't be true, but I'm just saying that it came from Paul Heyman. I was just like, oh, this is crazy. But like, this sounds like Vince McMahon. Vince would say this to his son and be like, if you want this business, you need to kill me for it. If you want it that bad, then that's what you're gonna have to do.
And Shane just looking horrified the whole time. So and yeah, and then this kind of goes with the Shane. So then episode 4 we have is the screw job, the job of screws, which we all know is Bret Hart. And this kind
Mhm.
of seems like this is the birth. And I know we're skipping around a lot, but it would be like 8 hours of us talking. The birth of Mr. McMahon, and I hate to ask this one because it's kind of a question that's been asked since the beginning of time. Who was right? Was it Brett? Was it Vince? Was it Sean? Undertaker? Canada? Who won?
Um, I hate to do this. I gotta play both sides because I work in management. I work with businesses. I've worked with corporate for a long time, and I understand the business aspect of things. Vince was very worried about the perception of Bret Hart leaving the company with a WWE belt going to the competitor WCW. I can see that perception, but the side story to that's not even mentioned in the documentary, by the way, is that Brett never intended to. Well, some of it is mentioned in the documentary. Brett never intended to bring the belt over to WCW. He never wanted that to happen. But this is what Vince felt. And the truth is, Bret Hart just didn't want to lose specifically to Shawn Michaels. That's what's mentioned in the documentary, because Shawn Michaels
Mm-hmm.
was a dick back in the day, and God knows what he is now. But apparently he's found God, and he's a good guy now, and he takes care of his peoples and stuff. But like before, he was nuts. He was the Dennis the Menace of the company back then. So Bret Hart's I don't think he deserved it still. Like, I think Vince didn't give Bret Hart enough, like personally, enough of trust. and leeway to allow him to do something with like the belt and the story and stuff. I think Vince, and we already know Vince can be a very vengeful guy when you do him wrong in the company, because we've known hundreds and hundreds of wrestlers who's been punished for like little things that he disagrees with, and we either see him in really bad characters, or they lose their belts, or they just get fired or fined and stuff like that. So I also see the personal side of it, and I feel bad for Brett, because Vince was probably just out to get Brett because he was leaving the company and he didn't like that. So he said, screw you, this is how I'm going to deal with it. So I can see both sides of it, but I think personally, though, it shouldn't have happened to Brett. It shouldn't have. Unprofessional.
Unprofessional. I mean, it seemed to me that, and we've seen about this before, Bret Hart wasn't able to put his personal hatred for Shawn aside and just drop the belt and call it a day. And then he stated, I would have dropped the belt and it would have been no problem. But it was Shawn. And that, to me, was not really what's best for the company. And what happens is that situationship gets so overshadowed because the match overshadows the fact that the match was amazing. It was such a good match that, everybody would have, if he just dropped it, it would have been amazing. If he ran off and he was like, nah, screw you, back, and took the belt, that would have been amazing. But the part of the match itself was so great. It was just, Bret Hart had hatred so much for Shawn Michaels that it was just kind of sad.
So that was just as unprofessional, is what you're saying.
He's just as unprofessional, but in a way, when you're dealing with someone who's such a loose cannon like that in that situationship, you're gonna probably have to screw somebody over, and that's what happened. And I believe that it was like, that insurance policy. I need the timekeeper. Ring the bell, even though nobody did anything. And Shawn in the back going, ah! And Undertaker just like, and then
Triple H in the back.
Get his.
Triple H in the backstage. I don't know what happened, man. I don't know nothing. I don't know anything.
but that situation was just so sad, just overall. But I will say this one thing about Vince. He knows how to play things on the fly. So that went completely awry. That went completely crazy. He let him. I don't know if he let him. That's another thing about Vince. We don't know what of these stories are true. And because he has such a loyalty within the wrestlers, which we'll talk about later, we don't know what's actually true. But he is able to use that situation and instead, and this is what I'm going to say. For example, parallel. I know people don't like this comparison, but I'm just saying comparison-wise. Tony Khan with the CM Punk situationship. And then him trying to make the audience understand something. Vince McMahon knew how to control people and therefore took that and used it to his advantage to do Mr. McMahon. And I like the fact that at the end of this day, this man knows how to do psychology. And he knows how to, which is the whole point of this documentary, is to show you he knows how to manipulate people to the best and to the worst. He knows how to manipulate people, and that is how we ended up with the birth of Mr. McMahon. And that completely catapulted WWE to the highest of the heights. Because I remember being a child, not knowing that wrestling was scripted, completely confused. Like, your boss is beating you up. This is terrible. And then this ended up with the rise of Austin. And it ended up with the rise of a lot of people because of McMahon and him catapulting everything. And of course, we'll talk later when it comes to how he punished people too. Because again, remember the whole, I forgot the name of it, but it was the hug, when they hugged each other, the click. Remember the click situation?
Yeah, the click.
When they hugged each other and they were supposed to be bad guys versus good guys, and you're like, oh my God, but they're hugging, and I'm confused. And him punishing them for not, being in character. So it was really interesting how I thought that ended up being. Yes.
I find it strange because when you mentioned that, one of the comments that came to mind was Bret Hart, and I think he's kind of being dramatic over it, but Bret Hart said that was the end of wrestling as we know it today or that day. Like that was the end of kayfabe because they broke character. I think that's a bit of a like dramatic assumption. I think that's a bit too much because it wasn't like that big of an event of a thing that happened until you saw it like on the internet or somebody showed it to you or whatever it is, and that makes it a big deal. But like it wasn't really out there to really like break people's perception of like, oh my God, there's really a dead guy, a dead Undertaker man, you know, burying people alive and stuff. Like still people believed a lot of that weirdness, but it is what it is. You believe it? Well, so okay. I mean, I was almost just as young. I was still older than you, but I was still just as young. And I don't know. I wish I could pinpoint. I got to think about this hard, like long, hard while. But I want to pinpoint the moment where, like, it's almost like when you figure out when Santa Claus isn't real. Like, when was the day that you found out that wrestling was like the stories and the characters weren't real?
So here's the thing for me. To me, even as an adult knowing this, kayfabe was broken when Undertaker retired and we started seeing him doing comedy stand-up shows. I was confused.
I never saw this.
Like I know that because you know I have an extensive history with WWE.
Yeah.
So even then, I'm still like kayfabe. I love kayfabe. There was a whole thing that I don't know if I can say, but they replicated Undertaker stuff, and I'm like, as an adult, this is the greatest thing ever. And look, there's people walking around like they're part of the what was it, Druid back then? I forgot the name of it. Was it Druid? I'm not sure, but it was like a part of the group that goes when he goes bum, and you know how there's the group dressed in the robes, and
yes.
there was an event where they had that happen and they're walking around in like Undertaker garments. And I'm like, as an adult, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. And even if you go to a pay-per-view show, this is a great, like if you was to see Undertaker's entrance when he was Undertaker back in that day, and I don't mean like the 90s, I mean like I saw Undertaker at one of the WrestleManias where nobody knew that John Cena came back. He was the last entry at not WrestleMania, at Royal Rumble. But I was able to see Undertaker do the whole Undertaker performance, and me as a grown adult crying, being like, "This is the greatest thing I ever seen." Yeah, I salute you. Who's Mark Calloway? This is the Undertaker. The moment that I can pinpoint when things got a little bit confusing to me, and I explained to my mother, like looking back, because some of these things I'm like, as a little kid, why are you allowing me to watch it? She said, Dad, because you're too dumb to understand what's really going on. So she was like, when they were screaming, for example, when Jerry Lawler kept screaming puppies, my childhood was like, oh, where are the dogs? I want to see the puppies. I'm confused.
You in fact saw the puppies every day.
I didn't know that those were puppies. I'm like, oh, and the whole thing with sausages, and I'm like, why are they pulling out food? Should I be snacking? I was confused. But the moment that something felt weird was was the Big Show, the Giant.
Wait,
remember
Andre,
when he wrestled
the Big Show?
No, the Big Show.
Okay.
His dad died. Funeral. Graveyard. Yes. Big Boss Man took the casket and drove out of the thing. And that wasn't the point, because I was angry. I was upset. I was ready to fight Big Boss Man for this. But then like a couple months later, they ended up being a tag team. And I'm sitting there with my grandfather who introduced wrestling to me. Like, why would he tag team like this? You do this to me, we're done forever.
We're
and
lifelong
my grandfather
enemies.
was like, lifelong enemies. My grandfather was like, yeah, she dumb. Yes, baby, I understand. That's terrible.
Oh man.
But still, again, it took me a while because I was like, it's real.
You
But why would you
know,
do this?
now that you mentioned Big Boss, I get this flashback. I think Big Boss Man, I think the moment that kayfabe was dead for me was that time where they hung Big Boss Man from Hell in a Cell. They hung the man on live television on a pay-per-view, and then you saw him again next week. And
Right,
I
when
was
you were so upset.
like, what, like, why didn't you? We just saw a death on television. You died. What happened?
This is why it was always upsetting to me. That remember when Bo Dallas is now Uncle Howdy, and he didn't shoot him, but he apparently there was a head injury to Chad Gable that made it look like he got tapped out in the head. There's certain
Yeah.
words you can't say because YouTube is like no. And so I'm like, but then he's like back the next day, and I'm like, sir, your brains are on the wall. I'm confused. So yeah, that was it for me. But I forgot what the initial conversation was.
You were mentioning the click in one of the episodes when they showed up there. Remember
Oh, the
that?
click. Yes, and I was explaining how, like, when you cross Vince and when you break certain things, he will punish you. And then that's how we ended up with Triple H was supposed to win the King of the
King of the
Ring.
Ring. Yeah.
Was it King of the Ring? Because
Yes,
that's
King
how
of the Ring.
Austin ended up
They
winning.
gave
And
it to
that's
Stone
how we
Cold.
ended up with 316. They gave it to Stone Cold, but it wasn't just that. That's how we ended up with 316.
Yep.
So it's really interesting how, like, just in general, how life works out for somebody.
It's
Was
fate.
like you're supposed to be the star, you're downgraded, and then someone else comes in and they're the top person. And then I kind of wonder, would it have been Triple H who would have taken on Vince McMahon? Or would that entire Vince McMahon persona continue to not exist? There's so many things to think about when it comes to storylines.
I think the Vince thing probably would have happened right after, just like you said, after he was seen as an evil villain after the screw job. I think it still would have happened, but maybe Triple H would have taken over the Austin kind of persona in the sense that, like, maybe they could have continued it as a DX thing, given Vince McMahon trouble rather than just Stone Cold or something. I find it funny because, like, it was that perfect it was just fate for that to happen to Stone Cold, because it was
Mm-hmm.
they mentioned in another episode as well. It's almost the same thing that happened with John Cena. John Cena was never meant to show up in front of Kurt Angle and just yell ruthless aggression and then smack him, and then he got a big pop. Like, he was a replacement for
Mm-hmm.
somebody else, and the ball just kept rolling.
Mm-hmm. Very, very true. And so it's just interesting how fate ends up working. And it's part fate and part him giving people that opportunity and that chance. So that was interesting there. But then we kind of go on with, this was, again, the birth, not just the birth of McMahon. This is also around the time, I believe I'm skipping some parts because this is 6 hours and my brain is old. But we also ended up having the Monday Night Wars.
Yeah.
And because remember, originally WWE, WWFE, or whatever we're going to call it, WWE, so nobody gets sued. Um, they started turning. They were still in that kiddie-ish era, Doink the Clown, and nobody was really paying attention. And then
Gobbledygooker.
that's when we ended up with Gobbledygooker. And then that's when we ended up with WCW, and that's where Bret Hart wanted to end up going, and just he went over there. Which again is so weird to me when you see, like, today's generation all upset about wrestlers bouncing back and forth between WWE and AEW, and I'm like, are you serious, you children? Google WCW and WWE. Fabulous. Anyway, here's the point. So this is kind of bleeds into, we end up getting the Monday Night Wars, where Vince McMahon, again, the brain is braining. This is when he's not stuck yet. Understanding that we need to change. We're getting old and stale and antiquated. Here's WCW coming in to its own picture. And granted, Eric Bischoff has his own litany of problems and things that I cannot stand about him, but there are parts where you have to argue the man was geniusy when it came to building WCW and it being a direct competition towards WWE. And that's when we started getting the Monday Night Wars. And we saw literally how a company had to change and pivot its way in real time in order to become number one. But they went through a lot and they suffered a lot. And this is what I really wish they would have talked about more, because Linda McMahon spoke a lot about this. They were bankrupt. Because they was using their own money with things. They were bankrupt, living in an apartment on like a 1-bedroom apartment, eating ramen, that kind of bankrupt. And the company was easily about to go under when WCW was like popping off and doing things. And how that kind of reminded Vince of, again, the trailer park, even though you can argue, but you're doing better, but you're not there. See, as much as you're losing, you're not there yet. And that really triggering him of saying, I'm never going back, which goes back to his childhood of with his dad, I'm never going back. And, because they also cut out the part that he wished that he was able to, I have to say certain words because YouTube is weird, unalive his stepfather. You can't say the actual word because YouTube is like, no, we'll strike you. So that was an interesting aspect too. And I feel like I'm bouncing around, but this is how we ended up getting into the Monday Night Wars and the Attitude Era. So that would be episode, I don't know what that is, 4.
Mm-hmm.
So what were your thoughts initially on the Monday Night Era, the Attitude Era, and him building a company from Doink the Clown to bra and panty match and blood and guts? And people seem to forget, again, this generation, I understand that you just now popped off and you're born, but you don't know everything. What you're complaining about in AEW, oh my God, there's blood everywhere. The things that you want in AEW happened already in WWE. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, they don't know the ECW side of things. Also, I mean, when ECW
and they touched upon that, yeah,
they touched upon that too. I mean, when Paul Heyman talked about that was like a a little brand that was building a lot of the big WWE stars before they got to WWE. So Stone Cold was there, Chris Jericho was there, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit. All of them were all up and coming, I guess, or I guess they were already big by ECW, but they got bigger when they got to WWE. But with the Monday Night Wars thing, the episode itself, I was meh about just because most of the information I already knew. That's pretty much the reason why. I think that's probably one of the best episodes for someone to watch if they don't know anything about the wrestling history, because that way you can get more of the idea of how competitive Vince is and how far he's willing to go. Like you said, they demeaned women so much. And listen, I'm guilty of it. I loved every second of it because I was a freaking teenager and times were different back then. So me watching it now, I was like, oof, that's bad. Oh my God, that would not fly now. This is so inappropriate. This is so wrong. But back then, that was the thing. People like the violence. People like people being demeaned. People like the villains. So yeah, they demeaned the women. The men were constantly making fart jokes and dick jokes and just a bunch of stuff. And it was Vince pushed the envelope big time to try to get people's attention. It was kind of like a moment of just like, it reminds me of when South Park first came out. South Park got so much attention because it was pushing the envelope on crazy storylines, and they cursed, and there was a talking poop character, and
Mr. Hanky, you respect him.
Well, I know. So like there was all this craziness, but it got people's attention, and that's exactly what Vince did, and it worked. Because I was guilty of watching WCW a little bit more than WWE at that point, especially when MWO was popping off and taking over the whole damn company, in the storyline and stuff. So I was guilty of watching WCW, but as soon as I started noticing things happening with the bra and panty matches, but also like the feuds with Vince and Stone Cold, the crazy like evil, dark stuff that the Undertaker was doing, like the Ministry of Darkness stuff storyline. The storylines with Stephanie McMahon and Test and Triple H, like those brought me right back into it.
Right. Again, I was very slow as a child, so I didn't understand things. So like bra and panty matches, and them wrestling in, I think it was mud and pudding at one time. Because remember this is Jerry Springer. This is when Jerry Springer was like really popping off, and so they was basically saying this is a reflection of the times. And of course, they were like looking back, they was like, well, we could have, and you can make the argument that yes, it is disgusting, or yes, it is a reflection of the times, but they were so much embedded in the times that they didn't have to do that. You know what I mean? They were such a big part of the company at that time where they didn't have to participate in, but it felt like an era of desperation.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back at it now, where you have people like literally women flashing themselves because, you know, DX said, suck it. And going over there and pointing, and there's the boob, and she's like, "Yay!"
Yeah,
and
not even the crowd, but the wrestlers, the female wrestlers themselves. There was live TV, and they would flash on camera and stuff.
They were live TV. They would flash on camera. China situation shit that was really weird, but to me, again, slow. This is how I was able to watch it, and I was blessed because Black Jesus was like, "I'm gonna give your grandfather 2 TVs," and he would set up the living room and the bedroom would be at the same like what's that word? Math perpendicular? Nope. Parallel.
Perpendicular. Oh, perpendicular.
No, it's parallel. No, perpendicular. Parallel. I forgot how that goes. But parallel. So I could sit literally in the middle of the hallway and just go like this and watch them at the same time. So I was able to like be a part of Monday Night War, but for the record, I did not have TV and I did not have cable, so I would have to go to my grandfather's to watch it. But that was cool because it was bonding time for me and my grandpa. My grandfather, by the way, is the one who introduced me to wrestling. But anyway, the point that I am saying is this. Everything went completely over my head. And now as an adult, it felt like it was shock value. It was cheap. Yes, I understood what it meant at the time. And I'm not, do you boo? This was the 90s. Things were crazy. But I feel, and it also, they brought that up, that they was using that as you could argue that they were using that as an excuse to be raunchy and to be crazy. And here's where it gets a little interesting. Who was writing the show?
You talking about WWE?
I'm talking about WWE. Who was writing WWE?
I mean, at that time, wasn't it Vince Russo?
No, sweetie. Who's in charge of WWE?
Oh,
Who
has
to approve every single thing?
McMahon.
So in a way, going back to the very beginning, we don't know where Vince McMahon begins and where Mr. McMahon ends. This ends up being, is this all of his fantasy? And it dives into that. It dives into, yeah, we were a part of the times. We were just following the trends. But you was writing and approving the shows. You was sitting there in meetings and taking pitches. You was the one at the end of the day who said, no, yes, more. It was him.
Putting himself in the storylines as well with these women.
And putting himself in the storylines with these women. And what did we see with the women? They would do what? Degrade themselves. This is when Trish was talking about bark like a dog. Sable would come in here with just the pasties on her very ample boobage. Good boobage, too. I mean, we're not supposed to say anything now, but those bodies with in general, just art. Point that I'm saying is, the point that I'm saying is he was the one who was in control of a lot of things. And this is when we get in the part where this is fantasy. And this is what's interesting what we brought up when it comes to Sable. Why did I call her Sable? Sable, who is now Brock Lesnar's wife. We'll get into that. But Sable, what ended up happening with Sable? Sable ended up suing the company. Remember that part where they were talking about, she sued the company. Yeah. What did Vince McMahon do? Because I'm thinking he was the one who wrote this. What was that lovely little segment where we had this woman sue the company? Remember that? They played that as part of the segment
Mm-hmm.
of everything that was happening in real life. They played for the stage. So you can't even make the argument this is entertainment because you're intertwining real life in with entertainment. And then this is when we had the introduction of his family. And you can add, you say, oh, this is really great entertainment. But in a way, I kind of wondered about this. It felt to me, everyone has their own point of view of how they wanted to be in a wrestling thing. Shane was begging for attention. Stephanie was the one that felt like, to me, was the son that Vince never had.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Shane is like, look at me, Dad. I'm doing this for you. And he was like, yeah, but Stephanie.
Makes you wonder why.
I don't know if we can, but
well, aside from that, the reason why I say that is because it's said in the documentary there was a storyline that Vince had pitched, and it was very off-putting even for herself, and that was she would be pregnant and he would be the father, and she thought that would be so weird, and it's you mentioning that him intertwining real life with fantasy or storyline or business, however you want to put it, it says a lot about him with this particular storyline, like what went down or what's going on in his head or what his thoughts are on the whole thing. I think it's a strategy, in my own opinion, of trying to blur those lines so that way either you don't question them or you truly think that it's fake, that it would never really happen in real life, so that way he can get off scot-free. Like the things that happen with Sable. Like if you're watching it live on television and then you hear that it's happening really behind the scenes, you're like, oh no, that's just kayfabe. That's not really happening. It can't be real. It's not really possible. Like I'm sure he's putting a lot of that stuff in the forefront, not to hide, but he's hiding in plain sight pretty much, and making people believe that it's all fake, all of it.
Yes. But here's my thing. What was one of the things that Vince McMahon stated about his family? Infighting, incest.
Mm-hmm.
What is your next storyline? I am going to impregnate my biological daughter. So it makes me wonder a lot of things about that in terms of blurring the lines and fantasy. Whose fantasy is this really? And why is this person number one when we have your number one saying, look at me, look at me? I wonder what is going on. And if you put a woman as part of the company, wouldn't that lessen the blow of, say, allegations towards other women?
Oh, yeah.
It's the same thing as, we can't be racist. Look, the vice president's black. My best friend is black. I'm not racist. What are you talking about? To me, there's no difference with that. So by putting her in the face of the company during these, and she wasn't like head of anything, but she was literally playing this role. And it was just really interesting in the situations and the predicaments that they did have her in, where she was being sacrificed by the Undertaker. There's a lot of things that they cut out. Do you remember the sexual assault angle, because we can't say certain words, with Linda McMahon and Eric Bischoff and Vince directing it?
I don't remember that one.
He was in the house. Eric Bischoff was in the house. Got into the McMahon house. Linda was by herself.
Oh, that's when he kissed her.
He was rubbing on her. That's when he kissed her.
Yeah.
And they was going to go upstairs.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting here, and it wasn't like, hey, we're in this together. This was clearly an assault. So I'm just like, what is going on? But I felt like he was able to act out his fantasies when it came to wrestling, and some of the parts that weren't fantasies that he acted out, it bled into what would be a fantasy. So then that way it would confuse people. As you stated before, you can argue, oh, it's a great, perfect tactic, but at the same time, who comes up with these random things? Like, no one provoked you to say, hey, I'm gonna impregnate my daughter. That's just wow. And then they didn't include Katie Vick, but remember the Katie Vick thing. It was like it's a corpse.
And Triple H mentioned it in that documentary too. That's one of the scenes that he regrets doing, but he still did it because he was practically forced to. He didn't have he has incredible pull now, obviously, but like back then, he didn't have as much pull as he did. So he did whatever Vince told him to do, and I'm not even going to mention it, but that Katie Vick thing was probably one of the sickest things in the entirety of it all.
For those who don't know, it involved a corpse.
Yeah.
And things happened with that corpse. We can say it was failure of the necro. But what was also really interesting with that is it showed that how he was able to control people. And this is when Trish Stratus said, was you ever forced to do something? And that's when she kind of remember that was the whole, wasn't that the barking or was that something else that she was forced to do? I think that was the barking.
Barking, yeah. That was.
And she explained how, right.
Sorry, I was trying to remember if that was like the question was, is there a scene that you regret, or is there a scene that you were forced to do? It was one of those questions.
Right, but she did mention that people were penalized for saying no, so you had to do what he said, or essentially you would be jobless. And then you can make the argument, because we'll go on later with the Shane situationship of one, that's how he controlled you. And you can argue this is when we saw a lot of I'm not going to say, I don't like the term brainwashing, but we saw a lot of people take Vince's side, which we even see today, who would argue, he gave me a job. That man gave me my career. What was your career? A job. You owe your everything. He can't do nothing wrong because, my paycheck came. So therefore, yeah, and we've seen a lot of wrestlers today, Mick Foley, who literally said that man gave me my career. He gave me that job, John Cena. He said that in the interview. Without him is my career. And
that's just the loyalty showing. That's all it is. Just because the man took care of you doesn't mean he can't also be a bad guy when you're not looking.
That's very true. That's kind of like saying, oh, I know Danny. Danny can't be the serial killer because he hasn't killed me. I'm alive. So you guys are just lying on good old Danny. But no, it was really interesting, I would say. But then this is kind of when there's a quote in here that I really, oh God, fuck Jesus, that really was made me so upset about this documentary was the Rita Chatterton situationship. I am not sure which episode that was part of, but the Rita Chatterton episode where he said, if it had been graping, the statute of limitations ran out.
Oh. Yes. My jaw dropped when he said that at that point. I was like, really? That's what makes it okay? Wow.
That was basically an OJ. I didn't do it, but if I did, here's a book on how I would do it. And that just shows you how bold he is. Oh, you can't catch me because look.
So again, I have to mention this, and I'm not defending him whatsoever. I don't care what statute of limitations that pass or anything. It's still wrong, and it still should be punished. I really hate that rule so much. But to Vince's defense, I guess, Vince sees everything in a business mindset. All he saw was the law. that's all he thought about was just like, oh, it's legal now. Like I have nothing to worry about, so that means I can't get in trouble. And I was just like, wow, this man is like, he's in a whole other world. He does not live in like our reality for real.
Right. And that goes back to the steroid trial. Because remember, there was the big cliffhanger of what would Hulk Hogan do? What would he say? And then Hulk Hogan also destroyed the union part.
Oh
And
yeah.
he openly admitted, he was like, yeah, I ran to Vince.
Finally, right?
Piece of dog poop. I hate that man. Anyway, so he seen with the whole situation of Hulk Hogan being his like eighth boy, in terms of he never turned on him. And when it came to the steroids case, and you could also make the argument it was a weak case, but he never turned on him. Remember, he was supposed to turn state evidence. He was the big star witness, and he was like, "Nah, I ain't seen nothing." Who's Vince? I don't know him. Never met him. I'm blind. Can't see. So,
blind wrestler.
So that basically just what's that word? Made him even more stronger, and made him just like impervious to things, and saying, "I can get away with anything." Because it's just all storyline. And remember, they didn't include this. I really wish they included them. Remember, he had the neck brace. He came to court with the neck brace. So it's like, oh, he got into this accident.
They touched on it very, very briefly. They said, oh, Vince is good at using things to gain sympathy, so he probably used a neck brace for that. But then they kind of just moved along. They didn't mention much of it.
But we know that, like in other documentaries, the neck brace was fake. Like the second they said not guilty, he ran outside, tore off the neck brace. I was like, woo, I'm free.
Yeah.
I wish they would have included that, but you know, he is a master of props and psychology and acting. And we've seen him with his acting. And in that way, I was wondering if he used it as like a protection of saying, like, look, this is entertainment while he's doing the dirty business outside. So then that way, here's a cover. You don't really know what's true. And as you stated before, that's when you go in that whole massage, because there was a massage segment. It was like, let me give you a massage. And I was supposed to be, was it Rita Chatterton? It was one of the masseuses that was in the salon parlor. And remember, she started screaming, ah. Remember? So that was a reenactment to say, look, it's fake.
Yeah.
God.
He likes to blur the lines, and that whole neck brace thing is kind of reminiscent to what's his name, Andy Kaufman. When the Andy Kaufman Jerry Lawler thing happened, like it was very much, it reminded me of that. Like Andy Kaufman was very much in character, making people believe this was a real feud. Like back then, people didn't understand what kayfabe was, but this was like that build up to like really like storylines happening outside of wrestling, and he had that neck brace on him, and it was like, oh shoot, like this is for real.
That was interesting. And then kind of going off the next episode, which is about family business. He involved the family fully in it. And yes, we've seen like Stephanie being kidnapped. I thought, and it brought back so many memories, that storyline was so good. Like you have to admit, it was some good. Like for me,
with
wrestling. There's two things. It was when Stephanie was kidnapped.
Yeah.
By Vince McMahon. And then that's when we get your thing. It was me all along. Austin,
oh yes,
Austin was like,
oh geez, what is it called? The ministry, the corporate ministry.
Yes, because to me it was like, okay, so she's kidnapped. What's going on? He's crying. That was some good darn storytelling and acting. Oh God! And then me being a kid thinking it was real, amazing. But it was not only just that. He was playing the part, and because he had and it goes back to being the puppet master. He had the audience in like the palm of his hand, and that's when Austin was the one who found her. Because remember, she was about to be sacrificed. It sounds so crazy if you're not in wrestling. You're like, he was what? I thought they were supposed to just do power bombs and leg lifts and drops on each other. But then remember, she was supposed to be sacrificed by the Undertaker and the Brood. But then Austin came and saved her, and people were upset because it was like, why would you do that? That's the boss's daughter. You hate the boss. But it was like, it made him more humanistic. And then Vince was like, it was me. God, we don't get storytelling like that. Like, if you take away the bloodline, what do we have? And it feels like this bloodline storyline is going to be for the next 20 years. What else can you give me? I'm confused.
I always like the
I mean, I like what they
supernatural
do.
stuff. I like the supernatural storylines. I want something I want something outrageous and unrealistic. It doesn't have to be like, boobs and penis jokes and all that stuff, obviously, because we're not in those times anymore. But like, I always like the supernatural aspect of the Undertaker and the corporate ministry, or the Ministry of Darkness and the Brood. Aleister Black was one of those that I had I had hopes for like a supernatural type of gimmick. I love the Fiend. Rest in peace, Bray Wyatt. Like, I love the Fiend and his other stuff. That supernatural thing. He was my new favorite then, and now, crossing fingers, have hope for Uncle Howdy.
Rest in peace to Bray Wyatt. I kind of feel like he was born after his time, in terms of that supernatural period. He would have been amazing in Undertaker and Kane when they were throwing fire and lightning balls at each other.
Yep.
And the trash can was like suddenly on fire. God, good storytelling, I tell you. But this was a very sad episode for me. This is like, it broke my poor heart. This was about the family and how Shane, from a kid, kind of goes back to what Vince did when he met his dad for that first time. He explained he wasn't really affectionate. I felt like he got into the business for that affection, for that to be seen by his father. And he said so. He wanted to be seen by his father. And he did the wrestling. And he figured the more outrageous stuff that I did, the more he'll pay attention to me. And then the more he'll love me. Because look, it's not only like, this is your son being a wrestler. It's also, look at the business that I'm bringing. I'm diving off of all these different things. Remember, there were so many different moments of him and they showed like a montage of him basically killing himself for his father. And wanting that attention and wanting that love.
He dove off the top of a stage almost every pay-per-view he was in, or the Hell in a Cell at that moment too.
And the Titan thing, and it was like a big joke where we thought he was gonna dive off the helicopter at one point because he came in with a helicopter. I was like, oh, he's going to really dive off the helicopter. He's going to just die right there, dive off the building, and he dived off the Titantron at one time. I think was that the Hardy match? I forgot which match it was, but there were a lot of things he was involved in, and I really loved. And then we got into Stephanie, as I said before, she being ingrained with the wrestling. And also, this is when it gets, as an adult, realizing this now because I didn't understand things. The hoe was like, I'm like, what's a hoe, Grandpa? It's Christmas. Ho, ho, ho. Oh, okay. Again, sorry. But it was interesting to see the difference in the storyline Shane was involved in and the storyline Stephanie was involved in, and how you can make that argument. It was very degrading.
Oh, yeah.
She was constantly being called a hoe. She had her shirt ripped off by her father's co-workers. I would have loved to have known. What was it like to be like, hey, you have to call your boss's daughter a hoe and rip off her shirt? And if you make the argument of the Triple H situation, and yes, we ended up in love, and I have a theory about that. At the end of the day, in storyline mode, Triple H drugged and sexually assaulted his daughter multiple times. And then they were forced to get married. And then they got married, and she didn't even know. There were so many lines crossed.
I think Triple H had said, it's not a question of when, but it's a question of how many times we consummated the marriage. And I'm like, what?
And Vince is like, it's storyline. I'm like, yeah, but
this is good shit.
Remember, and then they ended up making a puppet out of that. That's Bray Wyatt. That's the Bray Wyatt.
Yeah, Bray Wyatt.
And I'm sitting here and I'm just like, this is terrible. But that storyline to me was so fabulous, was the fact that she was supposed to marry the Tess. Then there was one storyline that they completely cut out, was when she got remember, she got Tess and Shane were constantly fighting. And there was a moment when Stephanie got involved in between them, and her head bounced off the wall and she ended up with a concussion. And she couldn't remember anything. That's when she had amnesia. And she didn't know that she was married to Tess. And I know this because when I was a kid, they put me in a writing class. And I rewrote that story, and I still have it somewhere today, where I used that storyline and rewrote it. And in the end, I ended up killing Tess and Shane in a car accident because they were fighting with each other too much. But the point is, that's how good their storytelling was. That's how good it was. But you saw how deeply involved Shane McMahon was. Not Shane. Shane and Stephanie were deeply involved, and that helped to create the storyline of the McMahons versus the company. And then we had the integration of Linda McMahon, who was like, she is a terrible actress. She could not take a bump at all. That stunner was amazingly awful.
I have to mention though, because it's so funny you just said that. She takes a better stunner than Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon fails every stunner ever given. If you look back, if you go Google every single stunner he's ever gotten, he falls or just collapses or just like flops around before he even hits the ground. It's awful. I don't get it. How do you mess up on this? You've been getting stunned for years.
So bad. And remember, Shane can't wrestle to me, and so he'll hit you, but it's like this.
Oh, the punching.
The punching. He does more punching than actual wrestling. So just go like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Rock'em Sock'em Robot thing. And then you can see like, oh, UFC. He really wanted to do UFC. It's so bad. But kind of speaking of UFC, he brought the UFC idea to his father because he was like, this is something that's new and fresh, and this is how we kind of bleed into Vince slowly turning into his dad a little bit, and you see him unable to expand and him not really understanding UFC. And in a way, you can't kind of really blame him because UFC was so different. And you could argue or make his argument that they deal with sports telling. And he explained it. We are creating stories. We create characters. We create people. And anything in the EF, what is EF? I am just like.
Oh, you muted. You muted.
Wait, can you hear me now?
There you go.
Hear me? Okay. So yeah. You can't create stars when it comes into the UFC, and he explained it. There's a short life. It's not protected. He's not wrong though. In a way, he's not wrong.
He's not wrong, but I think a part of it did play with the fact that it came from Shane. It was Shane's idea, and it wasn't Vince's own idea to do it, because this mofo was trying to bring up the XFL. Like, he was trying to branch out to other things. And how are you going to make stars of XFL players? It's a sport. It's a football sport, and it's a team-oriented thing. So, like, whatever his excuses for not going UFC, maybe it was because UFC at that moment in time was going bankrupt, and that's why Shane was looking to pounce on, the idea of it, could maybe try to buy it out cheap. But I don't think that's an excuse. Like, you came up with the XFL. You had a bodybuilding competition at one point too. Like, he branched out to other stuff for a while. He had a talk show even. And so you branched out for a while, but UFC is where you draw the line. I don't think that's right.
But you can make the argument as this: the first season of the UFC, the XFL was dog poop.
Oh yeah,
and that was because
absolutely.
It's not football. It wasn't football, and you can't attract a football audience to a show that's not football. You're marketing as football. You changed the rules. Remember, there were storylines. You remember that there were storylines. There was that camera, and here's the thing: they innovated a lot of things. I think that they was the first to use drones.
Yes.
To get the footage, and you see that incorporated when it comes to the NFL now. And you see a lot of things with their own way once they fired Kevin Dunn, their own production. That is really innovative if you compare to, say, TNA or AEW. Some of the shots look like something out of a video game. That drone thing that Logan Paul pitched was like, this is phenomenal.
That was cool.
But again, that's not Vince. That was through Triple H, who we'll go back to antiquated stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the point that I'm saying is this. XFL was trash. And there was a storyline with the women, remember the cheerleaders, and they're like coming out there, and it was like a backstage thing where they're fighting in bubbles. So you can argue that everything that he touched that ended up failing was still oriented to entertainment. Football was entertainment, but not the entertainment that football is. He tried to make it a soap opera entertainment. The restaurant thing, I don't know if you was in New York City at the time.
Oh,
when
WWF
they did
restaurant.
the restaurant.
Yeah.
Overpriced as all can be.
Mm-hmm.
The food was trash. I think I still have a Hardy Boys choker chain that was overpriced as all can be. It was like almost $40, and it was something that was probably.
I think the Hard Rock Cafe is there now. I think that's what took over. Yeah,
it's been there. It never left. The Hard Rock Cafe is there, but at that time. But why did everybody flock there before it went completely bankrupt? The pay-per-views. Yeah. Remember, we didn't have a sports bar that you can go and watch WWE in. It was different. The setup was different back then compared to now. So you can go there and see a wrestler. They had a whole bunch of events in that place, remember? And I think at one point, that's when they had like a WrestleMania press conference or a Royal Rumble one.
Did a couple.
Yeah. So everything that he touched, even with movies, they started their own production company. People don't remember. There used to be WWE Productions in terms of they made their own movies. See No Evil.
Yeah.
The with Undertaker. The Marine. The stuff with The Miz. There was some other stuff that was not good, but the Randy Orton. They had their own production company. It was just they needed better guidance. But everything that he was able to touch was entertainment related, and I think that he saw that he couldn't turn that UFC into entertainment. But you made a very good argument. Had that idea came from Stephanie, I wonder if it would have been different.
Yeah, maybe,
or Bruce Pritchard. That would have been different. Yeah. So, but with this episode of The Family Business, this is when we start getting into the sadness that was Shane. And as stated, Shane just wanted his attention, just really wanted his love and appreciation, and he never got that. And this is when we saw, a lot of tension and him disappearing. The argument was he was going overseas to start up WWE overseas and work with, I think it was China at the time, in terms of like the websites and analytical stuff, numbers and marketing. And then we never saw him. It was very heartbreaking.
It's either China or Korea. One or the other.
I think it was really China.
Is it China?
I don't think Korea. I think it was China. Mm-hmm. But the point is, one of those South Asian, is it South Asian? I failed geography. I'm from America, so our education system is not very good. I'm sorry. But I believe it was somewhere in Asia. But he really, nobody really knew or understood what happened. And he explained it like we were fighting to the point where our relationship was dying. And that to me was the saddest part, because it's not yes, it was a definition of your relationship could be dying. But Vince McMahon probably would have allowed that to happen because he chose the business over his own family. And that was really sad for me. Because it's like your son is right there and pleading, and forget the fact that, I don't like UFC. Just in general, he really wanted to be a part of the business and a part of that culture and be around his father. But his presence there was to the point where it was breaking them as a family apart. And it wasn't like, hey, I can't stand you. It's I can't stand what you're doing with the business. And I think the business is his firstborn. And just as we explained it with him being with the mistress, that is his wife. That is his firstborn. That is his mistress. That is his everything. It's not a job. This is a passion and a career. And it was just really sad to watch. So what was your thoughts on the entire family dynamic? Even with Linda, you can argue being forced to do things that she probably didn't want. And I really wish they would have included that Eric Bischoff part.
That was a surprising thing, including Linda, and then Linda admits in the documentary, "Oh, I'm not a great actress. I didn't really want a part in it, but Vince is convincing, and he had something for me, so this is what we did, and we went with it, yada yada." And the storyline, for those who haven't seen it, was Vince McMahon had a mistress, and that was Trish Stratus. And eventually, there was a moment where Linda McMahon becomes catatonic, and she's stuck on a wheelchair, and Vince is blatantly being sexual with Trish Stratus in front of a catatonic Linda McMahon. And Linda is literally just watching it all happen. Like, we're talking like makeouts and both of them feeling up on each other and stuff. And it's definitely a fantasy that Vince had, and he pushed it and he got away with it, and he can just brush it off easily as a storyline. But the surprising thing about that moment was that Linda, or as Trish actually says, Linda used to come up with some ideas for some of the segments they used to do, which is actually kind of shocking. I can't remember what it was, but yeah, I can't pinpoint it anymore.
It was the kiss.
Oh, the kiss on the forehead. The kiss on the forehead.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So Linda told Trish to like kiss Linda herself on the forehead, like very like evilish and very like a heel, and it'll give her some heat. And I was like, oh, okay, so like she's getting into this storyline. So it was actually kind of surprising. So I'm very curious as to like how much Linda, like behind the scenes, I'm wondering how much Linda allowed Vince to get away with so much stuff. I'm wondering how much of it he used to get away with. Like and I'm talking about like the infidelity. I'm talking about the sexual harassments or any lawsuits or hush money or any of those things going on. Like she must have known a lot of stuff that was going on back there and kind of just let it all happen. And because she just got used to it. When it comes to Stephanie McMahon, after once she started showing up on this, they started to sexualize her a lot. I remember there's this one video that I ran into on Twitter. It was either today or yesterday, of Stephanie. She was looking gorgeous, and she's got this skimpy outfit on. At this point, she had got her boobs done. Just for those who don't know, she had got her boobs done during her time in WWE, during her storyline. So she's out there. She's hanging out there. And then Booker T is on the mic, and he's cutting the promo. And Booker T kind of just turns around and kind of stops, and he's like, "Damn, Stephanie, you're looking fine," or something along those lines. And she's just like, "Oh, thank you." And I'm just like, wow, that had nothing to do with the story, and this is what you want to do right now. Another moment was, I remember when she had the feud with Jericho, and Jericho called her out on the boob job. Like, he showed a side-by-side comparison live on television, her before and after. And that's when they started again promoting this whole slut or hoe persona that she had, because she got a boob job. So like they were always happy to portray her as this thing, and like that just says a lot about Vince to do that to your own daughter. And then you see Shane for the most part. I think Shane was the one trying to push Shane. I don't think Vince didn't really care at all. So Vince McMahon, he'll put him with some really good matches, but Shane will try his best to make the match as good as possible. It's mentioned in the documentary, the feud between him and Kurt Angle, and he tried to get thrown into glass, which wasn't mentioned, funny enough, in the documentary, but people know that glass wasn't the glass they were supposed to be using. It wasn't installed properly, or the wrong glass was installed. So he had to throw him through the glass twice for it to even break, and then to throw him in the other side of the other glass 3 times for it to break. And he had a concussion because of it, because Shane did not want to let go of it. He was like, "Throw me through the glass, throw me through the glass." And then, surprisingly, after all that, I think it was that moment. I think it was that match. I can't remember. Correct me if I'm wrong. But like, that's when Vince had finally hugged Shane. and Vince and Shane had a good hug moment, and that actually got me teary-eyed because you can hear the emotion from Shane. You can't see his face because he's facing the wall, but you can see Vince's face, and Vince is actually crying. So that was actually a really nice moment. It was almost like Vince allowed himself to be human for just that one moment. It was kind of nice.
It was so heartbreaking. It's like, I love you now. You got a concussion. You almost died. You literally went through glass. So sad. And then this is what I kind of wonder. Everything when it came to the degrading of, because I'm sorry, that was just degrading of Stephanie, even if you're like, oh, I'm fine with it, which made me wonder, are they really okay with it? Was it we have to do what Dad says? And I don't think we'll get that story until after Vince is dead.
Yes.
And that's the story that I want. I want to know, were you actually okay with being a literal sex object and with grown men? Because remember, she entered the business at 15, 16, and that's just weird in general in terms of your age. Just, I mean, in terms of being a 16, 15-year-old, forget wrestling. Forget you say if you were Marjorie Boomtucky in the middle of Kentucky at 15, 14, 16. That's a weird stage to be in. And you're going through your own puberty things where things are growing and people are starting to noticing and there's changes coming and you have to just deal in general with the people that you're surrounded. Now you're on national TV. Now people are talking about you who have never met you, who don't even know you. And imagine walking down the street. Oh, look at your boob job. I just wonder what that was like growing up in general. And you could say, oh, she was an Adele at that point. Yeah, but it's not like, hey, I'm the actress who signed up for this because I want to be an actress. It's like, I'm doing this because it's the family business and I'm being written. It's being written that you're making fun of my boobs and you're making fun of how I look. And you're making, like, it's on purpose that you're doing this. So it's just kind of weird to me. I forgot what my initial point was. Yeah, the Shane McMahon situation was sad, and it was heartbreaking. And I was wondering if Vince. First of all, I feel that a lot of the things that Vince was saying in terms of, and Linda, she made me, she suggested that I kiss her on the forehead. I wonder how much of that it was true. Because then again, it goes back to the very beginning. I'm going to tell you what I want you to tell you. I'm going to make you believe what I want you to believe. So my whole family was just gun-ho for it. Linda McMahon, oh yeah, she was really into it. She told her to kiss me. And she wanted to see what, me running around without a shirt on. And me talking about it, I wish they would have talked about this more. His big thing with Vince McMahon was always the size of his man parts.
His grapefruits.
His grapefruit, that's what he called it. He called it his grapefruits. It was always about how big his grapefruit was. Big grapefruits, and look at all the women who wants him. And we're gonna have an affair in front of our face. And I kind of wonder, did Linda McMahon walk in a lot of that affairs? And because he talked about, he had that Playboy interview where he talked about extramarital affairs. Was that a lot of Linda walking in and her being in shock? And so I'm like, oh, I'm going to write this because now she's comatose. And it's the same look of shock that she had in real life when she walked in and she saw me, I don't know, with the maid. I just wonder how much of that was really true in terms of she was really into this. We want to make him look good. So she was really into this. What? She loved it. I don't know. But it was really interesting, just in general. And I think I skipped around something that I did want to mention really quickly was the fact that we had the Bret Hart, Owen Hart death. So Bret Hart died.
Ooh, yeah. I watched
Which
that.
we know.
I watched that pay-per-view.
He watched the pay-per-view. I, of course, did not. Because poverty. Who was ordering a $20? Back in the times, $20 was a lot for people.
Yeah.
I remember there was one where I was like, this is way too expensive. It was $25, but it came with a t-shirt. And I'm like, begging. It came with not just a T-shirt. They used to give posters. See,
Yeah.
if you're paying $50 for today's pay-per-view, wouldn't you like a poster and a T-shirt at least? You should
Yeah.
do that because I know
Yeah,
some
something like
people
that.
are paying, and those UFC pay-per-views sometimes be like $100. I'm thinking,
Yeah.
throw a T-shirt in there, give a water bottle at least.
I will say I was lucky enough. I didn't pay for. I don't think I've ever paid for a pay per view, and that's the reason why was because from like the ages like 15 and up. So obviously before I was an adult, I would watch them at my best friend's father's house or his house, my best friend's house, because his father was a huge fan too. So his family and me would join every pay-per-view and he paid for it and he'd cook dinner and stuff and we'd just watch it. And but then eventually, obviously, I grew up and I got my own place, and that's when I had to start paying for pay-per-views. But luckily they got cheaper because things went digital and like digital pretty much like made everything cheaper. So and now we got Peacock.
Peacock and Netflix.
And Netflix now. But go ahead.
So yeah, no, I life of poverty right here. I had to beg, and I'm like, I'm lucky if I can get like one pay-per-view a year. What was lucky was WrestleMania always fell on my birthday. So you give me those, you spend $20 on me. We're going all out. Pay-per-view. No, yes. So we know the story of what really, well, we don't know, but we were told the story of what really happened during the, oh my God, dark side of wrestling. They covered the Owen Hart tragedy. And they covered the fact, and it's very interesting because again, storyteller, he made it seem like, we're not at fault at this at all. This was something where he was supposed to descend from the ring, tied to this
Harness.
I forgot the harness, drop in like he was the Blue Blazer. I was gonna say Blue Beetle, Blue Blazer into the ring, and that's how he starts the match. Very simple for those who don't understand the imagery. Think of Sting, literally what Sting did. Yep. For those who didn't see him in WCW, literally what Sting did in AEW. Drop from the rafters into the ring or onto the floor by the ring, and we start fighting. So, obviously, the harness broke. He fell to his death. The blood was right there. Blood force trauma. He ended up dying. What it was interesting was Martha, who was Owen's wife, ended up suing because, his husband is dead, essentially. Vince and the company was like, no, it's not us. It was the harness. So look, we're not at fault. Those of us who watch Dark Side of the Ring knows that there were some things that was a little shady with WWE, especially in terms of cost cutting. Yeah, and that's how the harness was not the proper harness that Owen Hart is always used to wearing when he drops down from the ring. It was a completely different harness, and he did not do the practice. I don't think they held the practice that day at all for it, and a lot of tragic events happened. But the part that they brought up was, should they have continued wrestling? Because literally they're scooping him up. There's blood on the mat. Okay, go out there. And the wrestlers literally watched this man fall to his death, and now they have to perform. So the thing was, he argued that, look, people don't know what happened. Us on TV
said it was
watching,
dark.
It was dark. They couldn't see. It wasn't pitch black, by the way. It was just lowered lights.
Mm-hmm.
It was dark. No one knew. We at home saw nothing because they was running an ad. No, it was a package. It was a promo package.
Yeah.
Oh, here's the next match. So we knew nothing. They saw only darkness and didn't know of the real darkness that occurred that day. And so they had the wrestlers. And Vince made the argument, aside from it being dark, was, look, I have like 20,000 people in this arena building here. That means I'm going to have to refund everybody. They're not going to go home with a good show. There's kids. in the building wanting to see wrestling. We'll just say there was a boo-boo and he's not going to wrestle. What are your thoughts?
He this really got under my skin what he said, because he was on that chair and they were talking about the Owen Hart incident. He said those 200,000, 20,000, whatever amount of people, those people paid to see a show, not someone die. And even if it was, and then the interviewer was like, what would you have done if it was Shane? Like, would you have done the same? He was like, yeah, I would have done the same. I would have taken care of him. But like, forget Shane. If it was me, if I had fell down from those rafters, I would have still wanted the show to go. And I was like, wow, you are fucking delusional. And during that whole scene, and they show a bunch of cuts from other matches that are continuing on as the show goes on, and you can see people standing next to and glancing over at Owen's blood on the mat. Some of them looked, they were focused on the match and they were fine, but some of them you can clearly see they were bothered by it. Like, what the hell just happened? And some of them know that he died. I think it was en route to the hospital, and some of them are still kind of oblivious to it, but they had announced it. They made the announcement. And I remember that day, I was a kid when I saw it, and I was waiting for the Blue Blazer to show up, and then freaking JR and Lawler made the announcement that he passed away. And I was like, is this for real? Like, this got to be fake. Like, I was so confused. I couldn't tell. I was still in that age where I was just like, I couldn't tell when things were real and what wasn't. So I was like, no, I don't believe this. And then eventually, yeah, I understood it after the pay-per-view had aired. But yeah, it's just it was a bad moment. I think it was done wrong. Vince sees nothing wrong with what he did, and that shows a lot about what type of person Vince is. Again, business focus. He doesn't give a shit about anything else. Bret Hart said it best. He says, like, even though the evidence was there after they went through the lawsuit, and clearly the manufacturer was at fault, and they had a bad harness, and it was defective at some point. But even though Bret Hart was shown the evidence, he even said he wouldn't put it past Vince that he did this on purpose to get back at Bret for what he did during the screw job time. Like, that's the image that even this man has of Vince McMahon, that Vince would have such vengeance in his heart that he would kill his brother for revenge over what somebody else did.
Jeez.
So that was a crazy moment too for Bret to say that on camera.
And see, it's further justified for Vince to say, oh, if I was that bad, why did you come back to me? Because he came back to him. He wrestled with him again. And I understand Bret's justification, but is that really a smart justification? If you think that somewhere in the pit of your stomach that man purposely killed your brother, would you really come back? That's the stronghold that Vince has on people, where he owns not just you, families. He owns them because why? He gave me a job.
Yeah.
He killed my brother, but he gave me a job. You mean you can't do anything else in life?
There was a bunch of other Hart Foundation people who ended up still staying with Vince McMahon. After Bret Hart left, people knew about, Neidhart and Owen Hart, Bulldog. They all stuck around regardless of what they did to Bret Hart. And it kind of says a lot about the type of influence Vince has.
And then also I wanted to bring up really quick the Ring Boy situation with Pat Patterson. Basically, for those who don't know, that there was trying to say this properly, there were ring boys who would come in and set up in the ring, and in order for them to get their you can make the what is that word? I'm losing words. But they would make promises to them. Hey, we'll make you the next star, or we'll give you a higher position. We'll make you bigger part of the company if you do sexual acts for certain people, allegedly, because nothing was really proven, so we have to say allegedly legally. So allegedly, they were graping, because we can't say words, and touching these underage boys called ring boys. And that was a lawsuit. But one of the things that was really interesting was it brought up the fact that, and it's all allegedly, Vince McMahon not only knew about it, but you can make the argument he was aiding and abetting. He was helping to cover it up. And, you know, it just goes to show all the things that he did know, because it's his company that the things that he was a part of, and he helped to cover it up. And this is when you really got to get into the dark side of the wrestling, because there's a lot more that they didn't cover. But one of the things that I really wish that made me upset that they didn't do would have been really interesting if they would have did an investigation. You're supposed to be reporters. Find the people who was at that show, who went there. Did you see Owen Hart die? And what was that show like to be there? That'd have been a really fascinating thing, because I don't recall ever there really being an interview with the people who were there.
I thought
pretty sure some of them, somebody was alive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, did you see it? Yeah, I saw it. And what did you think? There was blood everywhere. Or maybe there's people who was like, we really didn't notice, but we knew that they noticed. And the wrestlers in the back were angry. And I wish we could have got more interviews with wrestlers. But then again, Vince owns the wrestlers. This was all before the fall of Vince.
You do notice majority of those wrestlers are friends with Vince. I mean, I wouldn't really call Brett that much of a friend, but you had John Cena, you had Undertaker, you had you had a bunch of yes, Tony Atlas is what that's what I was looking for. But you had a bunch of yes men in those interviews.
And even when it came to what's the guy's name with the black hair? He had the long black hair. It's not his name's not Jimmy Neihart. His name is something. I forgot his name. But one of the wrestlers was like, he was basically saying, I don't know how much the company wants you to know. Well, he kept censoring his answers. He's like, I don't know if the company really wants this out there.
I can't remember what that was.
He knows things.
Yeah.
So it was just fascinating and tragic and sad. So then kind of going up with the very last episode was called the finish. I was really surprised that they was going to bring this up. They touched upon this was Benoit. This was CTE. And then we later get into the recent allegations with Janelle Grant. So Chris Benoit, which I did not think they would mention. I thought this would be like the no-go.
Dead and buried. Yeah.
And this, to me, there were some answers in there that just made me angry. So we all know of the tragic murder-suicide of Chris Benoit and his wife Nancy and his baby David. It was David. Was it David? It was David, right? But it was the youngest one. His oldest one, who lived because he wasn't there at the house when everything went down. I can remember initially that I thought it was carbon monoxide because like the whole family was dead. So clearly it's carbon monoxide poisoning. And then this was when we had the lovely storyline of Vince McMahon was supposed to be dead. This was the limo, which I would have loved to have known what exactly would have happened. I know things, but I would have known, would have loved to see this actually played out. This was, they killed Vince McMahon, the character, on the show because they lived through a limo explosion. This is when something happened and he was walking that real slow walk and acknowledging everybody and the dramatic pause because they kept saying Vince loves his pauses. See, he knows how to do TV. Dramatic pause, close the limo door. Great editing, by the way. Boom, 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 boom. He's dead. And that was supposed to be the storyline. And then, remember, it got a little janky. It got terrible when they played out. Was like he's back, but that was Hornswoggle was somehow supposed to be his son. His long
originally it was supposed to be Mr. Kennedy.
Yes.
And yeah, because they fired him, I think it was for drug use of some kind or whatever. He failed his drug test or something like that. Yeah, they made it Hornswoggle. Which, by the way, for those who don't know, he's a little person. and he was portrayed as a leprechaun as his gimmick.
Yep. It was a long lost son. There technically was also supposed to be a long lost daughter in there with one of the divas, but we're getting sidetracked. What ended up happening instead was a very tragic event of Benoit dying and discovering that this was not carbon monoxide poisoning. What they didn't show was they had a big memorial show, like a special.
Yeah.
They don't do this anymore because, you know, Chris Benoit kind of ruined that. But when a wrestler died, you would have film packages of saying nice things about him. And it was a lot of crying. It was very heartfelt. I think CM Punk was in the company at that time because he talked about it during his interview with the dude whose name I can't remember, but that was the big interview that everybody turned into when he called, you know, Tony Khan's a great person, but he can't run anything. So this was interesting because this introduces another Chris who was a wrestler in the company and was a darn good wrestler, but he ended up with a concussion and it sidelined his career. But he, in real life, was in neuroscience, and he ended up going back to his career of being a neuroscientist, and he ended up studying the brain. And this was the guy who was at one of the forefronts of CTE and understanding what it was. And he was able to convince the Benoit family to turn his son's body over to him, and so that they can research the brain. And what CTE is, you cannot diagnose CTE when you're alive, at least not yet. You have to have been deceased, so then that way they can actually examine your brain and to study it. And they discovered that essentially he had an old man's brain because the CTE destroys your tissues. It destroys everything. It turns you into a completely different person. That's when we have the rages, the depression. You're not basically you anymore. And this was when it became very controversial because did Benoit kill himself and his family because of CTE, or was it just exacerbated issues that could have been already there? Was Benoit evil to begin with, or did CTE make him evil? And this is when we had some really interesting replies from wrestlers. What surprised me the most was Austin. Yes. And Austin was like, you know, I've had plenty of concussions. This is your best. I only had one concussion in my life. You're unsafe if you get a concussion.
He said, if you're getting that many concussions, you're not doing something right.
Right, you're not doing something right. And then it was also Vince McMahon. Well, Austin doesn't believe in CTE to begin with. He doesn't believe in it. And then it was like with a way to say, oh, it's not me, because he's trying to separate himself. I didn't do any harm to anybody. I'm innocent with everything. With him, it's like, oh, no, he just snapped one day. That's all it is. And I think Undertaker had some things to say too, which was just also disappointing. So what was your thoughts on that?
A lot, honestly. Number one, yeah, the whole Austin thing kind of like it knocked down my respect a little bit for Austin when it comes to saying that, because one of the defenses that they had with Chris Benoit not having CTE was because Chris Benoit's moves were, you know, every move that a wrestler makes, they do it in a safe way. There's a certain way to fall. There's a certain way to take certain bumps. There's a certain way to throw yourself off the top rope and you land a certain way. Yes, we get all that. What really pisses me off is that they failed to mention his main finisher move, aside from the cripple crossface, is a flying headbutt. And you can come up with the argument that, yeah, he knew how to land properly, so he's not really giving him a headbutt. But you're talking about a man who's been doing a flying headbutt for 25 years. He literally has no helmet. He literally has missing teeth, which he admits that he had gotten from doing headbutts wrong. whether it be because somebody lifted an elbow too soon or he misjudged the landing, but he had missing teeth. If you got missing teeth, you've smashed your head a couple times yourself. Like that is not you. Being a wrestler and landing your moves properly means that you have no trauma to your head whatsoever is a bullshit excuse. And that's what upset me the most about it. Yeah, again with the yes men, Austin said it best, and I don't like it now. Undertaker said the same exact thing, and they mentioned this that he got a concussion during the Brock Lesnar match, and they broke his streak, and Vince said he did not have a concussion. He must have just been shocked at the fact that he was losing his streak. And I was like, you're telling me that the Undertaker has said yes to you for every single thing for the past 25 years, but now all of a sudden he's in shock because he's doing something that you told him to do and he's not okay with it? Like, no, dude. Like, go ahead.
No, remember that we had a whole WWE produced documentary, The Last Ride, that covered all of his injuries that he had and covered the concussion. And he was sitting up there in those hospitals, them fancy hospitals, because they didn't put him with the basic poor people.
Yeah.
They put him in the nice fancy room, because I've been to that hospital. They put him in the fancy one. I think that was Well Cornell. Or one of those special it's a hospital for special surgery, which is basically Well Cornell. It's different departments of the hospital, but they put him in the fancy room where you get your own chef. They didn't put him because he would have normally had a roommate, and it was terrible. But they put him in them nice chef rooms when you get a chef. They also give you haircuts. I know that hospital.
Yeah.
Point that I'm saying, we saw an entire docuseries, because it wasn't one episode. This was a series of episodes where him recovering and him not remembering anything from that match. What was your name? Huh? Where am I? Huh? Where am I? He can't remember anything. His wife, whose name I can't remember at this time, had to keep repeating things, and she was worried sick. And you're going to tell me, oh, he was in such a state of shock. The man was immediately taken to the hospital with a camera crew. And the doctor is pointing out, this is your body. This is your brain. This is a concussion. Please turn off the lights. Why did he have the lights turned off? He was concussed. So it was just insulting.
Sorry, another thing I want to mention, this is kind of a side thing, but it still has to do with the whole Vince McMahon the explosion in the car. I really would have liked for them to mention this in the documentary, but they didn't, and it's understandable because it's a very minuscule thing. But for me, it brings out again that side of Vince of how petty and vengeful he can be. Did you know during his walk from outside the ring through the hallways and into his car, when he's in the hallways, there's a lineup of all these wrestlers there. There's one wrestler in particular who got fired for simply being there smiling. And for those who don't know, it's Paul London. Very good wrestler. Very good wrestler. That dude got fired for cracking a smile while Vince was walking down the hallway, simply because Vince was like, oh, that was not a moment for you to be smiling. You shouldn't have done that. Like, this is supposed to be a somber moment, and you kind of killed the whole mood and all that for smiling and stuff. So he got fired for it. Over smiling.
Remember Booker T got fired for touching him?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's right. Oh, man.
He touched him. It was like a simple pat on the back.
Yes.
He got fired.
Yep.
And this is kind of what aggravated me, that I really wish they would have dived into, which I'm sure would have just ended up being 20 hours, was the racism that we all know.
Yeah, we all know.
Existed.
Oh, Vince with the do-rag.
We know the series, what's up, man? That would have been when he did, going all the way back to the 80s, 70s. Crime Time, which was the 2000s. Was it the 2010s or was it the 2000s? I don't remember. But Crime Time was a was offensive. Here's two black guys. They're gonna just steal things, and that's their whole gimmick.
That's his whole thing.
You know,
I was kind of worried
Yeah,
Party what is the group called? The tag team that was happening recently. Party something. Shoot, what was from NXT?
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I just can't remember.
You know who I'm talking about. I was worried that they were going to be the next Crime Time, like because their whole thing was like partying and drinking and all that stuff, and I was just like, oh no, please.
Well, you
don't
could
do
have
that,
made the
please.
argument. No, remember when what's that group Montez Ford is in with the dude? Oh, that was.
I think that was it. I think that was them.
They were NXT.
It was like Party Time or Party.
Was it Party Time?
Party something. It was with the word party in it. I can't remember.
We can't remember anything. Was that Party Time? That was not Party Time. I don't think that was Party Time. Street Profits, no, because Street Profits was always Street Profits. I don't think they ever changed their name.
Oh, you're right. Montez was in Street Profits, right?
Yeah, they were. They're still in Street Profits.
So Montez is not who I was thinking of. It was Party something.
But there was like a moment where people were like wondering and hoping that they wasn't them. But anyway,
there were going to be like some stereotypes. Yeah, I think we're going on a tangent on that. Let's go back to the Benoit thing.
That's a good thing about this documentary. It had a lot of memories.
Yeah. With the Benoit thing, I think afterwards, yes. So they did a tribute to him as they do with most like big name stars. They'll do a tribute, and they kind of jumped the gun with it. Admittedly, like they kind of did. They did it pretty much immediately. It was either like the next day or it was the same day or something. They did the tribute. So, and then afterwards, that's when the details started coming out that it was a murder-suicide, and Vince was like, "Oh, we just paid a tribute to someone that just murdered his family. We need to do damage. We need to do damage control now." So, like, I could see that in the business side of things, that kind of like a little bit crazy. And yes, and they do still do tributes, but they do wait it out until usually like the next week at this point. Like
it's hopefully of like old age or a heart attack.
Yeah, they're more cautious about it, but they do still do tributes, which I do appreciate.
But this was the whole show.
Yeah.
Like,
well, they did one for Bray.
Well, Bray,
but they did matches to tribute for him.
They did that because that was a mess. Because Becky was crying. There was a lot of that was a mess.
Yeah.
In terms of like the emotional, but they don't do the because the whole show. No, I guess you would. No, you're right, because Bray got the same treatment, but they knew what happened with Bray. Because if you watch the Bray documentary, they were on the phone because with WWE and stuff. That was a sad documentary.
Yeah.
Anyway, so after the whole Benoit situation and discovery of CTE, there were a lot of safety precautions that they had to take, and this kind of bled into more of a PG-13 era because times are changing, so we have to change with the times, or else
not even 13. It was just PG.
It was just straight PG, and then but somehow you have to make the argument. John Cena is like a chameleon. He was able to really rise in that PG era. He went from being I missed that rapper. That's what he did. No, the rapping was before, because that was Ruthless Aggression era. And then it was PG era.
Yes, you're right.
So, but he was able to be that chameleon where he could have been, he went into that rapping route. He went into that, I'm going to fight you. And then go into that, I love the kids kind of mode. And then I wish he would go back to rapping. That was good. Oh, he's not wrestling anymore. He's retired. It's his last thing. He's doing his last
year. Yeah.
His last year. I think it starts. I forgot when it starts. It starts at the end of this year.
No, it starts.
Or does it start at WrestleMania?
I think it starts at Royal Rumble.
Oh God, what happened to this year? We're already almost in October.
Yeah, we're almost done. We're almost done. With John Cena, by the way, what's funny is that I appreciate it, and you don't hear this happen very often. But John Cena, when he was switching from that PG-13 to PG era, he changed the names of his moves. because his move back then was like it was a
FU.
Death Valley Driver, but he called it the FU. And that's not very PG. So he changed it. I can't remember what it is now, but he changed it. And then his submission hold was the STFU. And he changed the name of that as well. He just didn't want those connotations to be around there.
I miss the rapping days. I still have that right now. That Right Now song is still the best. That's top tier. That's right up there with Will Smith's Summertime, in my opinion, respectfully. But yes, so after the Benoit situationship, this is when they started doing drug testing and concussion protocols. And this is very interesting because they asked Chris, not Chris Benoit, but the other Chris, do you feel that he was doing it out of genuine safety, or was it more like an image thing? And he was like, I'm happy either way, because people are, you're surviving more. You're taking concussion protocols. This would have been a really good, amazing part to insert Ronda Rousey, because if you read that book or saw any of the interviews, she stated that they BS that concussion protocol because she got away with a lot of concussions, and she was supposed to technically not wrestle, but they didn't. She allegedly that they didn't do the concussion protocol the way that it was supposed to be done.
I think CM Punk used to mention that stuff too.
And CM Punk mentioned that too. So it is what it is. They're the one who's controlling these things, so they're going to give the answers that they want. But yes, so it was a lot of the safety protocol and changing a lot of things, and that's when we got that really weird thing with Undertaker and Austin. And I kind of wish that they would have inserted the Undertaker's other grievances with "I wish men were men" instead of being friendly and playing video games. They were stabbing each other literally in the back with the butcher knife that, Vince was like, you got to stab him for it. So, yeah. And then this is when we get into the Janelle Grant lawsuit. And that's when things start getting interesting, because from my standpoint, of which I remember, it was originally, there was money that he paid out to women because, it was a consensual affair. And I really wish that they would have included this, because you had the people from the Washington Journal there. Literally right there. And how it was presented to the public was she was in love with him. And everyone in the back knew it. Back meaning the actual office. Corporate knew about it, because she kept bragging about how much she loved being around him, and they was always around each other. And the door was always locked. That's how it originally was presented. And so she came after the company, and Vince is just trying to settle this and pay her off, and goodbye. And that's where all this, money, he didn't tell that to the investors where it actually went, and a lot of legal jargon. But then we discover through the Janelle Grant lawsuit, what actually happened, allegedly, was that she was living in this apartment and she needed money, and she went to a friend who introduced her to Vince, and Vince was like, I'll give you money and everything you want, but you have to do certain favors for me. And those favors were of the sexual nature, and it got more depraved, and she was essentially graped, because we can't say certain words. She was graped by not just Vince, but other people. I wish they would have mentioned John Laurinaitis. Brock Lesnar was mentioned not as being an assaulter, but he was mentioned by name that, hey, I promised her to you, so you have to do this thing for him. We all know by reading the documentary, reading the documents, it involved a lot of urination. There were things of defecation. Jesus. In the same weight room that CM Punk was working out in, by the way, allegedly. But and it got depraved, and she was used as an object that, it wasn't nice. So what were your thoughts on that?
Um, with it being mentioned in the documentary itself, I think they could have got into more detail about it because a lot of that stuff is out in public for you to see if you want to. But obviously, you know, if you want to inform the people in your documentary, you should be as detailed as you can. So they didn't really do that. They kind of just briefly touched on it. It was maybe like the last what, like 15-20 minutes of the last episode
Yeah.
is when they mentioned this whole thing that's going on right now. So I was kind of shocked that they kind of didn't say too much of it. I thought it was funny when you see an empty chair because Vince decided not to record anymore. Um, that's pretty much it. But like the situation itself, I would have hoped that more people would come forward after this had happened, and you're not really seeing it happen that much, which is
Uh-huh.
sad. So I hope more happens to it. I think one thing that we didn't mention that was mentioned very briefly also in the documentary, I think it was maybe the last episode, was Ashley Mazzaro. Um, that was a whole messed up situation. And for those who don't know, Ashley Mazzaro was a very good up and coming female wrestler. Uh, the WWE, they like to do how do you say
Tribute to the troops.
charity tribute shows for the troops. So they'll travel to like Afghanistan or Iraq, obviously a safe place. They'll travel overseas for the troops and give them a show. And apparently, Ashley had gotten raped by someone who posed to be a doctor. Apparently, she was like paralyzed and she was taken advantage of by multiple people, and she was traumatized by it. Obviously, rightfully so. When she went to report this after the show's done, I guess I would assume, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, after they got back to the States, I guess is when she decided to say something to Vince. They were just like, okay, I mean, it's done, it's past. Like, they kind of denied the whole thing or ignored the whole thing. And then when they were approached by it, they denied that they even knew about it. And then after Ashley had passed away, unfortunately by suicide a couple years after, a lot of people assume it's because of all the trauma that she had to deal with all this stuff. A lot of documents had come into play, it went into public, and some of it were messages saying that Ashley went up to Vince, and Vince said, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. Just act like nothing happened." And nothing ever happened. So it was kind of ignored. So you have one document that says that Vince knew about it, and all he said was, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it." And then you have another side of things of people approaching Vince about it, and Vince saying, "We knew nothing about it in the first place." Something happened. So that, I think that's a big thing to mention when it comes to the character of the company and Vince, compared to what's going on now with this lawsuit. Of course he's going to say it's consensual. Of course he's going to say nothing really happened. Of course he's going to be the victim of all of this because that's just the person that he is. So
Right.
you want to say that this is just a female maybe that's crying wolf and she just wants to get some money out of him. Sure, that's a possibility. But if you look at his past and you look at his character from back then, that this much possibility, this much, come on, like seriously.
And this was the scariest part that they did not include. But it is alleged that it was alleged through Ashley's friend that Stephanie allegedly was a part of the cover up.
Yes.
Which was heartbreaking. But again, goes to show if we put a woman as part of the company, this is a part when she was like co-CEO, you know, she was in that ranks. When we put a woman on a part of a company, see, look, we're really good. We love women. But she was also part of the cover up, yeah. Which then goes into when Vince got kicked out of the company. This goes into he retired, which I wish they would have included. Remember, well, I think they did include. Vince considers anyone who retires, basically, you're dead. He said you should just go and die. if you're going to retire. This is viewpoint on retiring. And then remember, we got the tweet at the age of 77. I want to live out my days as, with my family and my friends. That doesn't exist because they're all in the business, but my family and my friends. And so I am stepping down. And that's when I think the entire world was like, excuse me? We were confused. And it is alleged that there was a person who spoke to Vince and said that it would be best if he would just step down. And that allegedly, in the documentary, it seems that was Stephanie who had that ear, who was like, it would be best if you just kind of not do that. And you step down. And I don't know, again, we don't know what that relationship and that dynamic was like between all of the allegations. This is years of assaults that were alleged throughout the years of what she knew and what she didn't know. But I was wondering, did she finally say enough is enough? And that's why she said, hey, you have to step down. Because remember, it was said that he went and said that he had bad legal advice, and and someone close to him said you had to step down. And so the documentary makes it assume that it's her. And then when we thought everything was done, okay, good, he came back. And what was the first thing that he did when he came back? He voted everybody. He kicked off everybody who voted him, who said he should leave.
And then Stephanie stepped down.
And also said and he said he should not come back. And who was that? Stephanie, she fled. She's like, I'm sorry, I'm going to go quit now. Where are you going? And if you look at Triple H had the perfect setup of being the next in line. Because remember, we don't like Shane. He doesn't like Shane. That whole thing's Shane. So sad. Triple H was basically that next in line to run things. And I feel, to me, the biggest FU that Vince can do to his family is sell a company and no one has it. But here's some random dude from Endeavor who's allegedly, from my understanding, his daughter worked at a time for WWE. So that's a other conspiracy theory that we can dive into. But that is how I'm going to screw both of you over and my son-in-law. Shane is screwed. Linda's screwed. Stephanie's screwed. I'm selling it to Endeavor. You don't have any rights on here. The Rock I made head of the TKO board, which then makes me wonder, what secrets are you keeping, sir? For you to be the head. He never screwed him over.
He just has the money. He bought enough stock in order to have a part of the company. That's all it is. But I'm sure he knows things. I'm not saying he doesn't, but he definitely has enough money. No, he bought the stock. He bought the stock. Yeah. He bought stock.
But they gave him his name back. They gave him the rights to The Rock and all of the other names back, right? Because he didn't buy that back. They gave that to him. It was part of a deal.
It was part of a deal, yes.
And, that bloodline runs thick, as we all know.
Oh, yeah.
So my whole thing would be, why him? That's what I really want to know. Why him? Why not, for example, Undertaker? And not to say for Undertaker to run anything, but why haven't you given Undertaker his name back? Unless he didn't, I just don't know.
I don't know.
That dude has been that's loyal.
Even after Vince had left, when he stepped down for the second time, Undertaker still hangs out with Vince. Like Undertaker is so very much his yes man. Yeah, he's practically his bodyguard right now. Like he's always with Vince, even like out in public.
Him, Bruce, Brock is still there. We just don't see him.
Oh, Brock is hiding up in the Alps somewhere right now.
Brock is good. He got his hunting rifle and his snow in Canada. He good.
He got his puppies. He's got his house. He's good.
He got some seasonings. Did you see he got seasonings? He had some seasonings.
Seasonings?
He was on YouTube. And he was making seasonings, and he was butchering a cow. It was very graphic.
Ooh,
but he was butchering. Cool. He was butchering that cow, and I was like, And he had some knives, and it was good too. It looked real good.
You seen his daughter? His daughter looks just like him. And she's like this up and coming
wrestler.
No.
Like,
Well, I don't know if she wrestles, but she does the throwing
no, shot
thing.
put.
Shot put.
Put.
Yes, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Like she is like an
Yeah.
all-star shot put person. So it's just like, oh, so I wonder if they're gonna bring her into wrestling at some point because she's a big girl. She's a big girl.
She stole her daddy's whole everything because it's not just the face. She stole the mannerisms because she
Oh,
gave an
really?
interview and you could see the way how she talks, the way how she moves.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's Brock. That's a twin. That was crazy. But yeah, so then he got kicked out. No, he sold it to Endeavor. And then the rule was you gotta leave because this is too much. You get the poopings and the things is going on. So would have been a great time to have Janelle Grant, or at least Janelle Grant's lawyer. If you can't have her, have the lawyer come in and explain some things. What happened? Because this is supposed to be the McMahon documentary and the rise and fall of McMahon. You show me no fall. You mention it as you said, like the last 10 minutes. There's no fall.
Well,
it was like, and then he was gone.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, you mentioned it before. This I don't think this is really a McMahon documentary. This is more of a WWE documentary for Mr. McMahon. I think it was a very clean version, and like you mentioned before, when he passes away, we're going to hear a lot more truth. And I feel like whenever he does pass away, give it a couple years, we're probably going to get another documentary, a more raw, a more truthful documentary that has her talking about things, has the lawyers talking about things, have witnesses talking about things. Like Stephanie, Shane, like we're going to get some truth when he's gone afterwards because he's filtering everything right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. So that ended up happening, and it was overall it was good. As we kind of stated before, I hate to say entertained because it was a lot of depraved things, but it went by very quickly for me.
Oh yeah,
it didn't feel like it dragged. So I thought that they did a really good thing, but I just kind of Janelle Grant ended up responding. And they listed a whole entire litany of WWE's toxicity, kind of that correlates with the documentary. That would have been really nice if it was included, but whatever. So basically, she said, Miss Grant will no longer be silenced by Mr. McMahon. Her story, though deeply troubling and exceptionally painful, is one that can help other abuse survivors find their voice. We seek to hold McMahon, John Laurinaitis. I really wish they would have brought in John Laurinaitis because it was the entire team and WWE accountable to give Miss Grant her day in court. It wasn't like, hey, this was just a Vince McMahon thing. This was, and then again, as you said, this wasn't really like the documentary for that. But if you're going to mention it, you should have included it or just not mention it at all.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like it was tacked on in the end. And I'm like, aren't you guys investigative journalists? You had the Wall Street Journal, like right there.
Entertainment journalists. That's what they were.
This is why I never call myself an entertainment journalist. And I don't call myself a journalist when it comes to doing entertainment. It's not the same. But, so, Vince McMahon got very upset. And he released a statement, which should be really interesting if this ends up being true. This kind of reminded me of when they did the Michael Jackson interview with Michael Bouchier. And Michael was like, oh, you did me wrong. So I'm going to release all of my footage of what really happened during that documentary that you did. Vince McMahon stated that basically he is not only going to refutes everything that was in that series, but that he will quote. Let me pull that. Oh, Lord. Vince McMahon is actively working with former WWE executive producer, good old Kevin Dunn, who cannot hold a camera worth 2 cents. Please do not make that man edit anything. But he is working with him to release a response piece to his Netflix documentary that he fled at the very end. He said it was all lies. Lies. So what are your thoughts? Are you looking forward to his counter statement.
I think for a guy that says he's a victim in everything, this is not a surprise. But also, if you had felt like this documentary didn't portray you in the right way, then you kept on saying to yourself and to everybody else, oh, none of that stuff matters. It's not true. I'm not worried about it. I just need to run my business and move on. You're certainly not moving on. So clearly you're trying to defend yourself on something that has some validity of truth to it. So I think this documentary got under his skin, and I think he knows that because of this, on top of his lawsuits, on top of so much that has been crumbling, his entire planet is crumbling around him for the past 3 years. So this is him panicking right now, and I get it. So I mean, that's all how I feel about it. That it is what it is.
Right. And he did say, I don't regret participating in the Netflix documentary. The producers had an opportunity to tell an objective story about my life, and the incredible business I built was just equally filled with excitement, drama, fun, and a fair amount of controversy and life lessons. That's basically what the documentary was. Unfortunately, based on an early partial cut, I've seen this doc fall short and takes the predictable path of conflating Mr. McMahon character with my true self, Vince, even though he stated, yep.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Because I was going to say, actually, from mentioning all that, I saw an interview with Vince Russo yesterday. Vince Russo, this is Vince Russo. This man hates Vince McMahon. He hates the WWE after everything that had happened with him. Vince Russo actually said that this,
He's AEW.
Oh, he hates everything now. If it doesn't involve him, he hates everything now. He loved WCW while he was there, and then now he hates that too. So, but he actually said his opinion on the whole documentary was it was actually fair, that it didn't put him in a particular light that he was evil, but also that he was all good. They actually he actually gave it props for balancing both aspects, and I think obviously he can say things. He's very good with words, so he can explain things a lot better. You should look up that interview. So he says things very well, and I very much agree with him. So the fact that Vince Russo could think that this documentary was fair and it was good, like, that's a crazy opinion coming from him. So, like, Vince is probably out of his mind for thinking it wasn't fair.
Right. And then he says, this is the kicker. I love this part. A lot has been misrepresented or left out entirely in an effort to leave viewers intentionally confused.
What?
The producers use typical editing tricks without context footage and dated sound bites. So you get dated sound bites. Statute of limitations, that's dated, to distort the viewer's perception and support a deceptive narrative. What was deceptive, sir? You was in it. You participated.
You spoke.
In an attempt to further their misleading account, the producers used a lawsuit based on an affair. This is the Janelle Grant. He's still saying that this is an affair. I ended as evidence that I am, in fact, Mr. McMahon. So he ended the affair, and she sued. But you're conflating and confusing that with what I did with the Mr. McMahon character as it being the Vince McMahon character. And then I hope the viewer will keep an open mind. So open that mind up. And remember that there are two sides to every story. I would love to know his side. I want this to be public. You know what?
Vince's side?
Remember, I want Vince. No, here's the thing. And I know it's very easy to be like, oh my God, it's disgusting. And I get it. And I understand that. But legally, everyone has to have their day in court, right? I'm wondering this. Remember when Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial was public?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that in order for that to really be, I want everyone to know my side, he will make that trial public? If he could?
That's tough. Because you run the risk of things being revealed that he didn't expect to be revealed. That's a hard one. I don't know if he would. I don't know if he's willing to take that risk. But it would make sense. Yes, it would. Like if he knew he was innocent and he knew he did nothing wrong, that would make sense for him to do something like that. But that would also mean I'm pretty sure both parties need to agree for it to be televised. Pretty sure. So she would have to agree to that also, which means she better get her story straight. Well, we've seen her face, but she's got to get her story straight, her documentation. She's got to get everything right to make sure that she's not caught lying if what she's doing is wrong.
That's true. But I wonder, is that his way of controlling? Will that be the Mr. McMahon version coming out? Or is that Vince McMahon? Or we get the documentary we should have had. Is that true? Give me that.
I just pictured they're calling Vince and the lawyer and what's her name and the lawyer and Vince is walking down with the Vince strut down in the courtroom.
We need an expert.
And then you hear the music. No chance.
That's a good courtroom song. No.
Oh man.
No, that would be very interesting to see what ends up happening. But yeah, so they showed that, and then they also talked about how McMahon has touched everything from entertainment to politics, and how there's a lot of shared behavior in politics that we have seen today, especially with a certain politician. So, like, as I'm reading this document, and and I'm almost like, this statement that he released sounds very orange, especially when it comes to how you misrepresented a lot of the editing and tricks. They use tricks in games. I'm like, that sounds very orangey. So yeah, that is everything. So Linda's fine. She's off with the orange cabinet in politics, and I wish they would have also touched upon how they did WWE during the age of COVID. Because remember, this also happened during COVID. When everyone was during the lockdown, Janelle's situation was in the offices.
I completely forgot about that. They didn't mention COVID at all.
And because of them going to the governor of Florida, I believe it was the governor of Florida, who viewed wrestling as an essential business, that's how they were able to stay afloat. Which, if you're looking at WWE, they would have lost a lot during that time if they had to shut down. So I really wish they would have included that. Mm-hmm. And then they did mention AEW and how Cody came back. Which Cody, I would have loved.
Very briefly. Yeah.
Very briefly. They was like, and look, we never left. Look, even the people who left came back to us. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting. So then overall, I think that's it. I think we touched everything. Was there any other thing that you wanted to mention about this docuseries?
I enjoyed it, and I think for anyone who's a fan and been watching it for years and who's into like looking up the dirt in the industry and stuff like that, you're not going to be surprised with a lot that's going on with this documentary. But clearly there is still a lot to talk about. We've been talking for 2.5 hours on everything, but it's still a fun watch. I think this is mostly meant for people who are not aware with a lot of the stuff that happened in the history of WWE and Vince. And this is actually a very good way to gain, whether it be good or bad, because they say any publicity is good publicity, I think this is a good way to gain interest on people who aren't fans, to give the brand a chance when they start on Netflix. So they're like, oh, they're on Netflix now. Let's give this a shot. I heard this. I heard they talked about that. Did you see the documentary? Oh my God, I can't believe this happened. Let's see what's going on with the show now. So like, it'll gain some interest somehow. And I think it's a good marketing tactic regardless.
It is a good marketing tactic. And in January, I believe they released today, it was supposed to be January 6th. Was it 6th of January? That
when they start?
yeah, it's January 6th
I thought it was
that
the
they're
first.
moving to Netflix.
Oh, the 6th? Okay.
The 6th. It's January 6th that they will officially be moved over to not NXT, to Netflix. So as you did say, it's a really great crossover. And then, you know, initially this was not supposed to involve any of the last lawsuit because that ended up being something that was happening during the creation of the docu-series.
Yeah.
So overall, I thought, as again, it was very good. Even if you knew a lot of the information, it was I like how they presented it, because a lot of the times, especially when it came to Benoit situation, he was a lot on the defensive, and he's still on the defensive, but it was like, in a way, it felt a little bit different. You know, to have a documentary where Vince is fully involved is rare. You know, we have Dark Side of the Ring, yes, but Vince is not there. So we're not getting also the well, you know, that first season really popped off. But when they went after that Hell on a Plane thing, nobody came back really.
Plane Ride from Hell, yeah.
that did really bad. They didn't include Hell on the Plane. If you're gonna talk about all these sexual assault things, you should have talked about Hell on the Plane with Ric Flair running around with his ding dong dinging.
Was that the same one?
Crying over
Was that the same one where Brock Lesnar almost broke the door, the cabin door, or opened the cabin door?
I think
Or was
so.
that a different event?
I think that was because a lot of things happened on that plane. The door was almost broken. They drank all of the alcohol.
Yeah.
The poor women, the stewardess were just assaulted.
Yeah.
There was vomit everywhere. The food. I think someone's head got shaved. But Vince was like in the back, so he didn't know any of the things that was going on. Ric Flair was naked. It was a lot of things that happened. I wish they would have included that. But yeah, no, I thought it was good. It could have been great, but it was a good. I don't even want to say surface, because I think they did a lot of things that was a little bit deeper than surface. But it was still some surface things. But it was like a mid. It went mid there.
There's a bit of substance.
Yeah. Little bit of substance, just a sprinkle of some things. And even if you didn't know a lot of it, you know, it was in a different perspective, but they didn't go there. I think they were afraid to go there. I think they was more afraid of losing Vince as opposed to going fully there. So they chose Vince. But overall, it was okay.
The man is known to not, you know, meddle in interviews. He doesn't do interviews anymore. He doesn't like messing with the public stuff. So like, yeah, for you to get the opportunity to have Vince literally sit down and talk to the camera, I would do whatever he says too, because that's still money, regardless.
Yeah, I think the only interview I saw him was the Pat McAfee.
Oh, I didn't even see that. I didn't even know he did anything with him.
I think he did Pat McAfee. And I know Triple H did Logan Paul, but I don't know. Vince wasn't there with Logan. Wasn't there with Logan Paul. He did Pat McAfee. It was when Brock Lesnar showed up. It was Brock Lesnar, and then Vince came. He did that interview, and it was like really, really rare. And he was like, "That's because I respect you." So that's why he did it. But yeah, overall it was good. It was decent. Again, I'm happy that it didn't meander and take all day to say something. So it was great. So do you have any other upcoming stuff that you would like to promote?
Nothing at all. I'm working on a review at the moment for you guys. So keep an eye on that on the YouTube channel for the Video Game Koalition channel. We'll probably see that sometime this week. Okay.
And then as for me, you know, we're a lot of movies and TV shows that are coming up. I'm in the middle of a film festival, so you can stay tuned for that as well. And I guess we'll see you guys later. Bad Blood is coming up. I know Danny's like, yay, because now we got Bad Blood. Taylor Swift will do the theme song, and it'll be amazing. And Richard is going to physically be there.
Oh, nice.
So
wait, where's it at? Fun.
It's not Baltimore. Is it Baltimore? It's where you're at.
Flying all the way up there in Georgia. Yeah, that's why I asked, because I know.
It's like Atlanta.
I know Richard is in Atlanta, so I didn't know Bad Blood was gonna be here. I would have got tickets too.
Wait, is it? Well, let me see the state. The state is Philadelphia.
Oh, Philly. So he's like flying up there.
Well, either way, he's gonna be there.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works, but yeah, y'all have fun and enjoy the Bad Blood. That should be interesting. A lot of matches going on with that. So, guess we'll see you guys later. Have a great day, evening, night, and see you soon. So thanks. I don't know stop this. Wait, hold on, I don't know how to stop it. That's hilarious. End recording. Did it end?
No.
The editing.